Hello, everyone. Welcome to the discussion. My name is Andy Schmidt. I'm here with Carolina Lumetta, and we're doing another podcast. We're going to be talking about a bunch of different stuff. The 2024 presidential election, Trump, Biden, Robert Kennedy, the war in Ukraine, the Putin and Tucker Carlson interview. It's going to be a fun conversation. Before we get started, though, Carolina, do you want to tell people who you are and what you do?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah,
my name's Carolina. Yes, pronounced like north or south. No, not named for either state.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm a political reporter with World News Group, which is a nationwide, really global Christian news outlet. And I cover politics in Washington, D.C. So I'm actually here in our studio now. It is in this kind of weird triangle-shaped building right between the Supreme Court and the Senate office buildings.
Oh, wow.
So we are technically the closest newsroom to the Capitol, which has come in handy a lot when we've ousted speakers and struggled to get new speakers. And anytime there's a Supreme
Wow.
Court protest, I just pop my head out the window, kind of see how big the crowd is, and then hop out there.
There you go.
But yeah, I am from Michigan, so Midwest transplant. I put out a newsletter for World called The Stew. It runs once a week, so we try not to spam people, but it's kind of a quick roundup of everything you need to know about politics that week.
Yeah, and it's actually good. I've listened to, I've read a bunch of different ones over the years, and most of them have been kind of like surface level stuff or like things that you could just kind of find out on Twitter. Whereas I've read yours for the last couple of weeks, and I haven't found the things that you're saying like in the popular sections of Twitter and things like that. You're actually reporting on things that people might not actually know is happening, and that's been very helpful. And so it's a great newsletter. Yeah. Okay, let's get into this. I want to talk about the 2024 election. Things are going to start I feel like this summer they're going to start to get crazy like they do before every election. And maybe we'll kind of just go through each candidate, starting with Trump, and then going to Biden, and then talking about Kennedy. I know that there's other candidates. You got like Cornel West, I think, is still in it, right? Is that?
I honestly haven't been paying attention. He probably is.
Yeah. So we're not going to talk about.
Suspended her campaign and then unsuspended her campaign.
Oh, really?
So she's technically back in.
Okay. All right. So, well, maybe we'll just talk about the people who might have a chance at winning. So, yeah. I do want to get. So, you've been like following campaigns and been around a lot of different people on the right, especially in relation to Trump's campaign. I just want to know your general view and outlook on the Trump campaign and how it's going and how it's generally looking right now. I know that's a big question, but I kind of just want to get your thoughts as you followed this.
Yeah, well, I mean, the context for this is that I've been following basically all the Republican candidates through Iowa, New Hampshire, and South Carolina. So I've been chasing them a lot of different places. And it's been interesting to see what Republican voters really want. And it does seem like they really want Trump this year. There's a vocal segment of the party that very much does not. And I think we'll probably get to that at some point. But I mean, everyone knew Trump was going to run again. Everyone knew that he was going to have this kind of magnetizing force that we didn't necessarily see early on in 2016 because he was unknown on the political field. Now we do know him. You know, there was a lot of wishful thinking that the more indictments you put out against him, the more it would erode his support. That was never going to happen because the indictments come from people that his base does not trust anyway. So,
it almost helped him.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
his poll numbers have gone up it's been a little jump every single time.
That's crazy.
Wow. And you know, there's a lot of discussion to be had over how politically motivated they are, and some might be more so than others. But the fascinating thing about Trump's campaign is that he's running on the benefits of an incumbency with none of the cons of an incumbency. Because people have very short memories, especially when it comes to voter behavior.
Yeah.
So we're 4 years removed from a Trump presidency, so people will only really remember the good stuff.
Mm,
Whereas Biden, everyone can think to last week, how expensive were my groceries?
right.
Maybe they were still expensive, not as much so when Trump was president, but
Yeah.
you're not going to
Right.
remember that from 4 years ago. So he's running on the strength of his presidency when, in 2020, people were a lot closer to him being president and could remember
Mhm,
all the things they didn't like about it. Um,
mhm.
that being said, 2020 was a very, very close election, and I think we're going to head to another extremely close election.
Okay.
Um, yeah, on the
So I'm
campaign side of things, I think
oh,
it's a little more. I've heard a lot of it's a little more professional this time.
mm,
He has a lot of people around him who know how to work campaigns really well, are really well funded. He has a bajillion PACs that are funding everything, which is good
mm,
because he has a lot of legal bills to sell to or
mm,
to pay.
mhm,
But I'm looking forward to covering a lot more of his campaign. The hard part for me is that I still don't get access to I don't get media credentials for
mm.
any of his campaign events, which for all that he rails against mainstream media, he still does not let smaller outlets in. So
Yeah.
it's a struggle, but basically I just keep talking to people. My method is I just keep talking until you give me what I want. Um,
Mhm.
so the more I can find his campaign staff and just keep showing up
Right.
and trying to get in, eventually I will.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's a good method. I wonder, what have you seen as far as demographics go? Because one of the things that I've been interested in, is seeing, so I'm 24. I'm Gen Z.
Okay,
Uh
same.
and okay, yeah, like it's kind of unfortunate, being in Gen Z sometimes because of how progressive we are, but I one of the things that I've been thinking about and I've looked at in 2022 when everybody said there was going to be this huge red wave, the thing that people weren't taking into consideration that about, I think it was like about 50% or maybe a little less than 50% of the voting bloc in America at that point in 2022 was Gen Z and millennial. And Gen Z and millennials generally tend to be far more liberal and progressive than Gen X and the boomers. And obviously, as these generations get older, the boomers end up dying, and then you have less of those like old conservative folks. Um, what have you seen demographically at these Trump campaigns and at these rallies and things like that? Are you seeing a lot of young people, or is it generally the same kind of older cohort of Gen Xers and boomers?
Honestly, it's a mix of everyone.
Really?
I
Okay.
haven't seen that much of a um there's no predominant demographic. I think that supports Trump other than maybe evangelical. But
Mm,
I've interviewed a bunch of young people at Trump rallies. I've also
mm,
interviewed a lot of elderly people who can say, I can remember back to the days of insert old president here.
yeah.
Um, so, yeah, I mean, the caveat here is that people who will show up at a Trump rally are typically very, very motivated people.
Mhm,
Voters who will show up for primaries, which is what I've been reporting on, are the most motivated bloc of their respected parties.
mhm,
So, based on my experience, I can't say like, oh yes, every young Republican will vote for Trump.
mhm.
Um, but he's not necessarily hurting in young Republicans either.
Mm.
Um,
But
especially
would
when there's so much conversation about the culture wars and
mm,
if you're very conservative, um, you have a lot of, especially evangelical stances on protecting
mhm,
marriage, protecting family.
mhm,
Um, Trump really appeals to people in rural regions too, no matter
mm,
their age. So that helps out a lot. So,
mhm,
as a general, in the country, I think Gen Z, young millennials do tend to be much more progressive, but they also don't vote at huge proportions.
mhm.
And the ones that do are typically so motivated that they will be the most progressive side of the Democrats or the
Yeah.
most conservative
Mm,
side of the Republicans.
yeah. That is frightening, kind of. That the only people that are doing anything in the younger generations are like the absolute extremes is that probably isn't good. I think, yeah, would you say that there's probably more more of the progressives though than there are of the conservatives, as far as those like
Of
diametrically
all,
opposed. Yeah.
probably, but I don't have the research right in front of me to back
Right.
that up.
Right.
So
Totally. Yeah.
pure conjecture
Yeah.
at this point. But yeah, if
Mhm.
you're on Instagram or TikTok and,
Yeah.
the Biden campaign uh, wants to ban TikTok, but also set up a TikTok
Right.
account. And Democrats running, even for down ballot races, are using TikTok and social media to very, very effectively um, target younger voters. And yeah, that works. Republicans don't
Hmm.
do it quite as much.
Yeah, Republicans have a difficult time. So I worked on a political campaign in 20 in Minneapolis, or Minnesota, in
Oh, cool.
2021 to 22. So I don't know if you know Dr. Scott Jensen. He ran as the Republican to be the governor of Minnesota. He lost at 22, but I
Okay.
worked on that campaign. And one of the things that I noticed while working in the Republican Party, just in Minnesota, I and this might be true across the country, was that Republicans, because there's these multiple different streams of conservatism within the Republican Party, you get different things. Obviously, conservatism is like the definition of to preserve. You get different streams of what we ought to preserve. And so some people only care about preserving economic freedom. Some people care about preserving social values like the family and marriage and things like that. And because of that, you have all these different distinctions, and it's less fluid than liberalism has been. And so they I found that they have a very difficult time creating a message that is general enough that a lot of people can get on board with, but specific enough to actually take into consideration the conservative values. And because of that, getting a message out there, it's like impossible. So
Mhm.
I don't know if you've seen anything like that, but the liberals, I think, are so good because they don't really have any core beliefs other than I want to just, I mean, literally the word, liberalism comes from liberty, is to do whatever you want, whenever you want, however you want. And so that's a pretty broad value system.
True.
So
Yeah. I mean,
yeah,
I think what you've identified though is the real push and pull of politics.
yeah,
Because, yeah, in conservative circles, everyone is going to have their line in the sand. It
mm,
just varies what your line is, whether that's
mm,
abortion or economy or, um, you know, DEI, culture wars
mm,
types of things, but everyone will have a slightly different one. And so there's this big debate now over what counts as a true conservative. And I
right,
find that really fascinating.
mhm,
You do have the same problem on the liberal side, though. You know,
mm,
I've interviewed so many people who used to be in the Democratic Party, but have basically been kicked out because it's not liberalism in that you can just believe whatever you want. It's that you
mm,
have to believe these very
mm.
strict things.
Yeah,
You
right,
have to be
mm,
affirming of so many
mhm,
things. And if you
yeah,
feel hesitant about supporting BLM or trans rights or any of
mhm,
these things, suddenly you're just kicked out. There isn't as much room for debate
mm,
within liberal circles.
mm.
And
Yeah,
I
that is
think what we're
interesting.
seeing is there's so much debate then in conservative circles that it feels more chaotic, but that's because
Mhm.
you do have a lot more viewpoints that are allowed to be expressed.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. They've talked about like the secular creed that liberalism has taken on, and maybe yeah, it might be a little bit. I guess, and that's good that you say that because I actually agree that there is like a secular creed, and if you don't abide by the rules of liberalism, you can't be part of the Democratic Party anymore. I do think that list is very long, whereas in conservatism, we're trying to figure out what's the shortest list of absolute uh, core values that we can't.
Mm.
Whereas, like in liberalism, it's like in marriage, generally speaking, they're okay with any sort of any sort of marriage. I'm using air quotes because there's as Christians we believe men and women get married,
Mhm.
but they believe men and men, women and women, trans people, everybody can get married. That's all within the umbrella of marriage, and therefore their definition of marriage is fluid. So if you're a conservative and you say, I believe marriage is between a man and a woman. They're like, well, then you can't be a part of us, what we're doing because our
Right.
secular
I mean,
creed
that's why you
includes.
barely have any pro-life Democrats anymore.
Yeah. When was there pro life
There used to be
Democrats?
so many.
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
90s, apparently. And I
Yeah.
say apparently because I only really started
Right.
reporting 3 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
About 3 years ago. So, but I've interviewed the president of the Organization for Pro-Life Democrats, and she was
Mm-hmm.
telling me that she's not accepted in women's circles because they view her as
Yeah.
anti-woman. She's not accepted in Christian circles because she's a Democrat, or
Mm-hmm.
conservative circles because she's a Democrat. She's not accepted in Democrat circles because she believes life begins at conception and should not be aborted. So it's kind of just this maverick group now that doesn't fit anywhere, but it used to.
Mm-hmm.
And, even at the policy level, people will say that, McCarthy was not a great House Speaker, or Mike Johnson is not a great House Speaker because they struggle to get the votes that they need to pass anything. And part of that is just inter-party bickering on
Yeah. Right.
most of the level. But they compare it to Nancy Pelosi and say, oh, Nancy Pelosi got every single vote. That's because she intimidated people. That's
Mm-hmm.
because you are not allowed to step out of line and still get funding for your
Yeah.
campaigns. So it's not necessarily that the other system is better. It's just that it
Right.
looks more cohesive because it roots out any opposition.
Yeah. There's a power structure, and it's in that way can uh, be somewhat Marxist in that there's this power dynamic between the highers and the hierarchy and the lowers, and that's a good point. I've never actually thought of that. I've usually just thought like, yeah, the Democrats just all kind of generally don't have solid belief systems, and so they'll pass things through that generally move the needle further to the left, which probably is part of it. But you're right, there is this intimidation factor, and we've seen that because of the lack of integrity in certain politicians. That people are willing to take it, do what they have to do to get the things passed
Yeah.
that they need to get passed, and so that's definitely interesting. Okay, so the main problem that I wanted to talk about as it relates to Trump, and I
Yes.
look, like 2016, I was 16, so I couldn't vote. I loved Trump though. I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin. It's like the most progressive city in the Midwest. Maybe not. I think Michigan has some pretty progressive places too, but
Yeah, we could give
Madison
you
is,
a run for your money there.
yeah, yeah. But Madison's pretty bad, and so I was kind of the only conservative Christian person, like in my high school, basically. And so when Trump was running, I was all in. I was like, "This is great," like he was very outspoken, a very different figure, and he wasn't afraid of saying politically incorrect things. Now, okay, so fast forward to this election cycle, and I have a video that I'll put into the show notes. It's Trump talking with Megyn Kelly, and I don't. It's a weird clip because they're talking about transgenderism and whether or not women should be like allowed to use men's bathrooms or vice versa, and like kind of how the transgender thing should be played out in the coming years, and according to policy. And Trump talks a lot about the military not having allowing for trans surgeries and things like that in the military, and kind of drawing the line there. But then when he talks about children, he's like, well, that should be up to the parents. So he kind of backs off on that. There's this weird thing happening on the right where there's things like transgenderism that to me is so clearly, obviously not even a question of conservatism. It's more just a question of reality. Like, is a man, is a woman. That maybe in 2016, Trump would have just been like, this is crazy. We're going to just get rid of all of these transgender types of ideologies that are influencing government and children and all these different things. Now it seems like he's kind of a little bit back and forth, wavering. Like, I have friends that are, he talks about Bruce, Caitlyn Jenner. Um, I guess my question would be like, what do you think about that whole dynamic? I mean, and what have you seen in the Republican Party and in Trump's rallies and as you talk to people? Is that actually an issue? The trans issue, is that actually an issue that Republican voters do they care about that, or is that kind of like there's nothing you can do about it now? It's so implemented into the social fabric.
hmm I think they do very much care. I
Yeah.
think that it sometimes doesn't get as much traction on a news cycle because
Mm,
it is very state focused at this point,
sure.
on what laws are you going to pass to change the wording of your constitution to
Mm,
um, protect these doctors who are performing really really awful procedures on
Yeah.
kids. And then is it kids that you should allow, or adults allowed to do whatever they want? It's this whole range of things. I do think conservatives care very, very deeply about this. I think that when it comes to kids, a lot of progressives do care more about this too. They're just trying to find that line of affirming that people can be trans while also saying, you're allowed to make your choices as an adult, but we need to protect kids. So I do think it's an important issue, and I think it's something that people do still very much care about. It just isn't, a national law or something that you can fight against like Roe v. Wade was for abortion. So it's much more scattered, I guess. When it comes to Trump, I mean, it doesn't surprise me that that's how he talks about it. He goes back and forth so much on abortion too. One day the Susan B. Anthony list is saying, yes, he's a great pro-life president. The next day they're like, we have real concerns with him not supporting a national ban. And it goes back and forth all the time. And the reason for that is because Trump is a politician. What really gets me is that so many people I interview at rallies will say, he's not part of the swamp. And they also very much fear for my soul living in DC. I very much like it. It's a fantastic place. But, they'll say he's not part of the swamp. And he really stuck it to the establishment, and he is above politics because of who he is as a person, and he's just a man of the people, all this stuff. I'm sorry. Once you get the nuclear codes, you're no longer a man of the people.
Right.
You're very entrenched in politics, the inner workings of politics. When he got to the White House, I think there was this lack of understanding of how things worked, which is what the voters wanted. They wanted somebody who could shake up the system, not be like a career politician. And, he didn't know the major players in DC. He didn't know how things worked, and it caused a lot of strife. Maybe it caused great policies too. We can have a separate debate about his first term, but he's still campaigning and people still see him as this political outsider, but he's not. He will cater his message to whoever his donors are. He will cater his message to the block of voters that he needs. It's kind of just an open secret that he picked Mike Pence as his vice president to get the Christian vote. And I'm very curious to see who his next VP pick will be, because I don't think it's weird. He has just such a level of popularity that he can, in many ways, just do no wrong. So he doesn't need someone like Pence anymore to give him a voting block, because he's not really trying to win other sides of a voting block. He's trying to win donors, because this is also the first campaign he's had where he does have actually a significant cash flow problem. He didn't have that before, but when you're on the hook to pay almost $500 million to the state of New York, the bond got decreased actually, but it's
a lot of money.
He has to pay so much, and it is going to end up being more than his net worth. And he calls that a lot of political persecution, and that's kind of a separate topic too. But it does put him in more of a position where he needs to appease donors. He was speaking out against the TikTok ban, even though he's taken a very hard line to China before, because he had Jeffrey Yass at Mar-a-Lago for dinner, and Jeffrey Yass has tons of shares in TikTok. And then Trump comes out and says, well, you can't ban TikTok because then it would help Facebook, and I hate Facebook. So it's not that he speaks on his own convictions so much as he finds the issues that are going to really help him, either electorally or with donors. So with abortion, with trans issues, he can't win the election purely on the far right vote. He can't win a bunch of donors purely on building a wall.
Mm,
or getting rid of the FBI or something like that.
mhm.
Like
Yeah, right.
he knows how to play the game now, and he is.
Mhm. Yeah, okay, this is interesting because I totally agree, and I think this is the crux of the issue that I'm seeing. I guess what I'm seeing with the Republican Party that growing up I thought was, and I'm gonna break this down philosophically because that's just I guess how I think through this. But the literal definitions, so conservative, conservare, to preserve. So you're preserving a value system or a set of values. That was essentially historically what the conservatism was. Um, and then liberalism, I mean, can be broken down in two different ways, according to the for people who want to fact check. I think it's according to the Stanford Philosophical Encyclopedia. It's two. There's positive liberalism, or sorry, positive liberty and negative liberty, in which positive liberty is the freedom to pursue virtue. So that's like American Revolution. We're not going to be told how to worship. We're gonna break away from tyranny to pursue religious freedom, to pursue virtue, good things. Whereas negative liberty is the freedom to do whatever I want to do, whenever I want, however I want, with whomever I want, as long as you quote unquote don't hurt anybody. So then everybody just argues about what it means to hurt somebody. To be like hurting somebody's feelings could be a violation of that. And so I think the crux of the issue that I see now in the Republican Party, and what you're talking about, is that the the fluidity in which politicians on the Republican Party who claim to be conservative um, kind of change their rhetoric and change the tone and kind of change their viewpoints on certain things based off of who they're talking to and what sort of donors or what sort of voters they want. Um, I guess that to me just is fundamentally part of the liberal ideology, which is, I guess that's fine if that's what somebody wants to admit that they are, but to equivocate it with conservatism to me is very difficult. And so I've seen this happen in Trump's campaign in the exact ways that you're talking about, with like abortion, with the trans issues, with even gay marriage, things like that, where like at one point he's like very biblical. I mean, I guess conservative in the biblical sense, preserving biblical values, and then he's talking to like a certain group of people that maybe like don't hold those opinions, and he's kind of switching the message up. And so it leaves, I think it leaves true conservatives in a very difficult position, because you essentially have two liberal parties that are the main parties. One of them claims to be a little bit less liberal than the other one, which is the Republican Party. And and so tell me, I if I'm breaking the stuff down just too like abstractly, if that's how you're actually seeing that, though, because you're on the ground, you're talking to people and you're interacting with people. So I'm not doing that. I'm just like at home reading books and like on Twitter. So is that too much of an abstracted view on what the actual political landscape is, or are you seeing the actual voters be flip floppy on certain things as well?
Um, it really
It's a big
depends.
question.
It, it really depends on the crowd. And I will say, I don't think anybody I've talked to at a political rally has brought up Stanford's definition of different
I
liberties.
know. I know. Yeah.
So
Well,
that is a very
yeah. Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
come up in normal conversation.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, there is just kind of the natural selection of the groups I'm in. So again, these are very
Mm.
motivated
Yeah.
people.
Right. Hmm.
So there's a lot of people at Nikki Haley rallies were
Mm.
really wrestling with these issues. People
Mm.
at Trump rallies are not. You
Mm.
know, people at Trump rallies will say, of course, he is the most pro life president we've ever had because he appointed
Right.
the 3 Supreme Court justices. As a side note, there, I don't know that he appointed them because he believes in
Mm.
the pro life cause, or if because he knew that he had kind of promised that before and it pulled really well.
Yeah. Hmm.
So, but
That is interesting. Yeah.
nevertheless,
Hard to tell. Yeah. Right. Right.
it helped him so much, and people still
Mm.
talk about it at every
Mm.
single rally. But they're not, you know, they're not necessarily debating
Mm.
conservatism outside of Trump. So,
Mm.
this
Oh.
might be
Okay.
kind of a halting answer to
Yeah.
your question, but I recently published this story where I was curious to see, is the Republican Party changing to be completely centered around Trump, because that's what it
Mm.
does look like.
Yeah.
And what I found is that across every single state I've traveled to, across so many activists and conservatives that call themselves MAGA, so Make America Great Again.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I specifically was looking for people who would call themselves that, because I don't want anyone coming back at me saying, stop
Right.
slinging an insult in my face. Like, if someone calls themselves MAGA, they wear that very proudly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And
Right.
the MAGA movement is the flip side of liberalism, where the line in the sand is Trump, honestly.
Mm.
You
Mm.
have to be loyal to him.
Mm.
And a lot of the other side issues fall to the side. Whatever Trump says goes.
Yeah.
Or, you know,
Yeah.
it's that they want to get rid of kind of what is called like the elites, the
Mm.
global tyranny, that there's this huge belief that
Yeah.
society is oppressing conservative voices. And there are certainly examples of that. So I'm
Mm.
not saying that every part of the ideology is factually incorrect,
Mm-hmm.
but it is becoming this new and growing group where it's not that you're debating philosophical positions on trans ideology or gay marriage or foreign policy. It's that this is what the party leader says. Our job is to follow the party leader. Here's all the ways that we are mad at the establishment, so we're going to root them out because that will
Mm.
fix the problem. And Trump is at the forefront of that initiative.
Mm.
So, again, I don't know that this really answers the whole philosophical side of things, because also
Sure.
I just do not think very philosophically.
That's totally fine. Yeah.
But I also don't know that it's that large of a conversation at the grassroots level,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
at the level where Republicans do need to connect with
Mm-hmm.
people in rural areas who do very legitimately feel left out, who or people in, conservatives in very liberal areas who feel
Mm-hmm.
like they have no voice. And
Mm-hmm.
it's all that part of connection is what Trump is really, really good at.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that's yes, and that is helpful, because I think that the dynamic that, well, this is what I'm like, I fear for, because the people who, generally speaking, are the ones who, and you can tell me if I'm wrong about this, but the hardcore mega people, if you're thinking about, so it seems kind of arbitrary. Trump is going to kind of make up whatever like he thinks, and he's fighting against the deep state and all the terrible, the swamp and everything like that. And so we just have to all align with what Trump is kind of arbitrarily thinking in a particular time and space in a particular moment. Uh, that's scary for me, because it's one, Trump is old, and so there's no vision forward. So if when Trump dies, that whole thing falls apart, because who Trump is dies with him, and or just when he becomes old, like Biden, and like incoherent, then that falls apart. And so the thing that I think, like the politician that I think back to historically, that I think maybe is contrasted to somebody like Trump, who would be on the right, would be like a William Wilberforce, who spent 30 years in Parliament trying to get rid of slavery, because he was like, slavery is wrong according to his convictions. Um, and whereas Trump is more like, yeah, well, you have these issues on transgenderism and abortion. We can't like, we're never going to win if we just try to hold the line at like zero abortions or banning transgenderism or things like that. And so they give an inch, or they give a little bit, in which the left is always like going to take that and stretch it as far as they can. And we've seen that with the Republicans at the debates, when all of the Republicans were there. We had like DeSantis and Vivek and all of these people, when asked about when they would put a federal ban on abortion, they all kind of like looked around at each other. It was an awkward moment, and then they're like, "Well, like 13 weeks." And then you look up, you're like, "Okay, so what?" So 13 weeks, how many abortions? At first glance, you're like, "Oh, that sounds good," and then you're like, "Oh, 93% of abortions happen in the first
Yeah.
13 weeks." So you're not even that's not even a conservative view at all. You're still okay with the murder of millions of babies. And so the problem, so the fundamental issue is like, what's the vision forward then for the Republican Party if it's just all arbitrarily based off of the what Trump thinks, and if Trump is just trying to look at different voting blocks and kind of play this like malleable, like kind of be like water being poured into different cups of different sizes to fit whatever certain groups of people want to believe. What's the future? I don't know if you have an answer for this. I'm just trying to think like what do you do about that? What's the future of the Republican Party?
Hmm. Honestly, I would love to know that answer too. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a lot
Are-
what I was asking people for this story because,
mm,
you know, the MAGA sources will say, well, the future of the party is bright because we are
mm,
making a comeback. We are going to take over the party and we're going to
mm,
restore it to the party of the little man. And
mm,
we're going to be there for everybody and get out all of this woke ideology, get out all the career politicians. The ironic part is that they're also ousting the career politicians who support Trump,
mm.
but
Yeah.
they don't believe the election was stolen, or they've been in politics for too long, so
Right.
you know the game, you have to get out. So,
Mm,
I mean, they would love to see the future of the party in that way. Um, Nikki Haley voters have no idea what they're going to do in the fall. And
right.
they're concerned that the party is all following Trump, but they're also hopeful that, there's a guy who told me that the Republican Party has been around long before Trump, will be
Mhm,
around long after Trump. But the
mhm.
Haley voters are like, we're not so sure because
Yeah,
we're
right.
being branded as not true conservatives anymore,
Yeah.
even though Haley's policies and Trump's policies were very, very similar, aside
Mhm.
from international affairs.
Right. And Haley is not like the most conservative person. I mean, she pulled like
Well,
she was pulling like feminist, like she was trying to pull like the feminist
well, here's the thing. I
card.
think she genuinely is
You think
conservative.
so?
Yes,
Okay, explain that. I don't agree,
because
but
okay,
explain.
here's the thing. You do have the philosophical. Here's what I believe. That
Mhm.
will always be at tension with what you can politically make work. And
Mhm.
I think that's what hurt Nikki Haley the most,
Mm.
because she was so middle of the road that she could appeal to both conservatives and moderates. She did not appeal very much to liberals, other than maybe an alternative to Trump.
Mm.
But no real
Okay.
liberal is going to vote for her
Mhm.
because she wants term limits and she
Mhm.
wants healthcare reforms, but in a way that Democrats don't like.
Mhm.
And she um, she is pro-life, but I think that's what hurt her most with the conservatives, because she wouldn't say, when I'm president, I will ban abortions after
Mhm.
6 weeks. Because
Mhm.
also, she did have a very fair point that that is never going to happen in the politics we
Mhm.
have today. And if you
Yeah, I
hold
mean,
that line, you can hold to your philosophical, here's what I believe, and that is
mhm.
great. But if
Mhm.
you hold that line in the hopes that it will affect that change, it's not going to.
Yeah, okay, but Wilberforce, they said the same thing. Slavery is never going to be outlawed. So why would you even try for 30 years to get done? Look, I
I mean,
understand
that is a fair point.
the political landscape. I get what you're saying. When we look at it right now, we're like, there's no way. Abortions, what, like 3,000 abortions a day in America. I mean, it's a gigantic problem. People are like, oh my goodness, you're going to say you're going to ban it at 6 weeks. That's never going to happen. You can't get enough people on board to actually even
Hmm.
implement that sort of
But also,
thing.
how many years did Wilberforce work for this?
He worked 30 years, but I'm okay with somebody saying the same thing for 30 years if they're standing on principle rather than Haley saying
Right.
or
So
Trump
I think if
or
we
Vivek.
had a senator
Hmm.
or a House leader who was
Hmm.
on that fight, great. A president can't
Hmm.
do that, though.
I mean,
A
okay,
president will only ever be in power for 8 years, maximum.
yes, but they can still stand on principle for those 8 years in support of the people outside of them who, like you're saying, might be there for a longer period of time to say, like, even though I'm going to be here for 8 years, this entire 8 years, I'm going to be relentless on like making sure babies aren't murdered. Like that to me seems,
Mhm.
even if I relate that to slavery, I'm like, actually, slavery is really bad, and they were killing people in slavery, but not at the rates that we've murdered babies in the last 60 years in America. We've murdered 70 million of them, which is like the Holocaust times 5 or 6. And I look at the issue as a like a I understand what you're saying as we talk about it politically, but I think if politics is downstream of like values, which I think it really is, and if we're supposed to stand on principle and to figure out what is the law, the government is upholding law, and we're talking about one of the laws in America is like you can't murder people. But then that breaks down when it's only okay, it's only you can't murder people until we find some sort of philosophical hack to justify our understanding of what the word human being is, so that then we can murder what we don't think is a human being. Like in Canada, people can pull the plug early, and it's like assisted
Yeah, it's
suicide is, and that's, we would agree that's like horrible. But you look at what's the difference between that and abortion? They're both, there's absolutely no difference. But you'll have somebody who agrees with abortion say that, or say that abortion's okay, but that's wrong. And you're like, well, there's philosophical I guess value system contradictions all over the place, which is I think what I see in Nikki along with Trump. And I'm like, I don't know how I could justify voting for any of you, but I
mhm.
also don't want to be one of these people who don't vote, because those people are annoying, because then they think they're better than everybody else. I didn't vote. I don't want to be that person. So
Right. Okay, well,
I yeah.
I do think it is important to fight for life. So,
Hmm.
hear
Yes,
that
I'm not
as a
questioning. Yeah,
very first.
yeah, yeah.
All I think that yes, it would be a ideal world if we had not even just one person, but a very concerted effort
Hmm.
that's saying, here's how we're going to protect all unborn lives.
Hmm.
Um, as it is, Republicans do not know what to do with the abortion issue anymore since they don't have Roe v. Wade to fight against.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
has
That's true.
not been working very well at the statewide level. You've had so many new laws passed, or at least make it
Mm-hmm.
to the ballot box, and it will be on several ballots in November to amend the state constitution and allow abortion. And they keep
Gosh, yeah.
passing in the primaries and passing in the midterms because Republicans cannot figure out whether to say all abortion will all be illegal,
Mm-hmm.
or can we allow some exceptions, or should we compromise on a week number? And so the conversation
Mm-hmm.
becomes about what week are you in favor of, and all of that clashes with a liberal ideology. So I think Nikki Haley was conservative in that she still wanted to save unborn lives.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
She was never clear about what that specifically meant. And I do think that that made voters and people like yourself uncomfortable because you
Mm-hmm.
can't really tell, um, how passionate are you about this? Are
Mm-hmm.
you really going to fight for this? But her position of saying we want to save as many babies and help as many mothers as possible is at its core a conservative viewpoint
Mm-hmm.
because you're affirming that there is life in a womb and that unborn babies are worth saving. And far left Democrats are never going to go for that. So that's
Right.
where I think she was kind of in the middle of the road in her campaign. Um, but again, it's not very specific because, and that's what turned away a lot of
Mm-hmm.
conservative voters. However, I think part of the reason she was saying that is because it is kind of the only workable way forward in the politics we have today.
What do you see as her disagreement with Vivek? I mean, because they hated each other's guts.
Yeah.
So they hated each other's guts, but they were also, so okay. So if what you're saying about Nikki is true, which I didn't follow her campaign as closely as I did Vivek. I was like all in on Vivek, and then he just dropped out for, I feel like, the Iowa caucuses.
Hmm.
Anyway, so that people
Well,
dropping out because of the Iowa caucuses makes no sense to me. It's such a small,
oh,
uh,
the whole primary system,
yeah,
the more
doesn't
I've
make.
tracked it, makes less and less sense. Like, why do we do this?
Why? Yeah,
because
the Iowa.
I get
Explain.
people
Can you explain the
answering.
Iowa caucus? Can
Yeah,
you explain it just
so
so people know what it is?
the Iowa caucuses, Iowa gets to vote first in the
Mhm.
primaries. They're very proud of this tradition. And they vote first because some guy in the 30s decided he wanted to get this over with, and he said this is the rule going forward. So
There we go.
the Republican and sometimes Democratic, you can have the state parties will decide whether they'll vote on the same day for their respective primaries.
Okay.
The Democratic caucus in Iowa is very complicated. So I'm really happy that we didn't have one there this year because it would have been chaos to cover. But Biden was the presumptive nominee since the very beginning, so we don't have to worry about that. The Republican caucuses function in that every single precinct in every single county will meet in person on a particular night in January, which is, if you know Iowa at all, is a terrible time to meet. This year, it was the coldest caucus night on record.
Oh,
With wind chills, it was around negative 30 degrees.
wow.
It
Yeah.
was intense,
Yeah.
even for a Michigander like me.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not as easy in that, on most primary or general election days, you will go to the polls whenever you're free. But caucuses are a specific meeting. You have to go to the meeting. You cast your ballot within your party. And then people will stay around and vote on other down ballot races or determine the party platforms, figure out who's going to go as delegates to the convention. So it's a very localized meeting place. Only the very, very most motivated voters will come out for a caucus and for a primary, but more so for a caucus. And so that's why we had every Republican candidate stumping like crazy in Iowa. And Vivek Ramaswamy did the absolute most. He did multiple events every single day. He went to all 99 counties. I think he technically did it twice. So he was in every county, every stop. His schedule was insanity. But it didn't work because he never polled very high, because you can't run as a rebranded version of Trump against Trump.
You think that Vivek's a rebranded version of Trump?
That's what he's trying to do. That's why he's been campaigning for him since then. I think
well, that's what's thrown me off. But when he was running, that did not.
He said that the only reason voters should pick him instead of Trump is because the deep state establishment is never going to let Trump back.
Right, and I think he was in on Trump, but I also think that his values were like 10 times more conservative and concrete than Trump's. And I think he understood the cultural moment as well, way better than Trump does. Like, I think Vivek understands the younger generation's proclivity towards progressivism, and he understands that the only way in which you can combat that sort of progressivism that leads towards transgenderism, soon to be transhumanism, and all these different all these really, really bad policies that are going to hurt people is with kind of a more revolutionary a more revolutionary stance on the opposite end. And I think that's why he was like, we're in a 1776 moment, which is kind of cringy, but whatever. I understood what he was saying, that he was trying to diametrically oppose the revolutionary aspects of the progressive left with a revolutionary movement on the right. And I think that revolutionary movement was rooted in, I think, like, really conservative values that don't align with Trump, which is why I'm so confused why he's so all in on Trump now.
I think that Vivek set himself up as the more opinionated version of Trump. Because the thing about Trump, too, which we've already talked about, is he'll kind of say what he needs to say in the moment. So you can't necessarily plug, here's what he really believes. But Vivek stumbled over himself so many times praising Trump. And he needed to get that segment of the party to vote for him. He was very much trying to appeal to them. So I think you do have a point that he was much more vocal about it. He explains himself really well. He is very energetic. And he has these philosophical arguments to back it up, all these different things. But it does align with Trump. But it sounds more academic. So,
Mhm.
you know, his views of immigration and Trump's views of immigration are identical.
Are the
It's just
same.
that
Yeah.
Trump is very bombastic and speaks in
Mhm.
run-on sentences and
Mhm.
has all these asides, and Vivek
Mhm.
will distill it to this very poignant 30 seconds.
Mhm.
So I think that's why Trump has really enjoyed having Vivek help campaign for him.
Mhm.
Um, we can't tell if he's on the vice president shortlist or not.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah.
he's on, sometimes he's off, but nobody has seen the list yet. So
Mm.
I don't like reporting on it when people are like,
Yeah.
here's what sources close to the president, or here's what
Right.
Trump said maybe is
Right.
on the list. It's like, until I
Right.
see names on a page,
Yeah.
I don't know what's going
Totally.
on. But I
Right.
also
Right.
don't know if a Trump Ramaswamy ticket would work very well, because I think their egos would clash far too much. But
Yeah.
I
They're
think
both alpha. Yeah.
their politics are very, very similar. And
Yeah.
you can't
Mm.
run on a track of trying to be a new version of Trump when Trump is
Mhm.
readily available to voters.
Mhm. Yeah, I felt like that was with DeSantis in some capacity as well. I
Yeah.
mean, I don't know if he was trying to. I feel like he did such a terrible job because it's because DeSantis, as far as effectiveness goes, like Florida is a highly effective. I mean, he's been a highly effective governor in Florida, and it's definitely like to me the most conservative state in the country. Uh, and it just did not translate well to this. Like he was not able to capitalize off that at all, which is fascinating because if the right is claiming that they want to do everything that they can to like push back against the deep state, I think that I just have a problem with disconnecting. I think the right is disconnecting the people from what they act, the values. So they want to push back against the people on the left, the Nancy Pelosi's of the world and the AOCs and all those people, but they don't actually they like demonize those human beings and say those people are the worst people. But what they don't recognize is that those people are operating out of a very specific ideology. And so that ideology is making its way through the left. And Trump, I don't know how else to put it. Like Vivek, I think had a really great grasp on what that ideology was and was willing to push back on that in very specific ways, like you were saying. Whereas Trump he has this general feeling that there's things that are wrong with the left, but most of his feeling, I think, is based off of the fact that the left is pushing back against him specifically, rather than against his values specifically. Where I think actually the left's underlying goals is to get rid of the core fundamental values of conservatism, the nuclear family, the individual responsibility, the religious freedom and right, the right to worship and things like that. They're they're going at those values. They see Trump as kind of a hurdle and this weird hurdle, and Trump sees it as he is the value rather than he must represent the values. And so they just keep pushing back. So then he just keeps pushing back against the left, and the people on the very far MAGA right are pushing back against those people. But I don't really care about Nancy Pelosi. Like Nancy Pelosi's annoying, and I don't care about like AOC's annoying. These are all really annoying people, but I care about what they represent and what they're going to implement within the like social fabric of America. And we've seen this in our generation being the epitome of this ideology, this progressive ideology, and that we were brainwashed into it for what 18 years in public school system or whatever 20 years in public school system. On top of that, you have the social media aspect of it, which the Democrats do a really good job of implementing, and so the ideals and values that the liberals are fighting for end up just winning out because Trump is not. I don't think he understands what his values are, and maybe
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if this is a good segue into the Trump Bible that thing, but like it feels like he's just taking whatever thing he can grasp at and trying to fight back against these people, but they're all going to be dead in like 10 years. They're all old, and so when they're all dead and he's
Are you
dead,
saying old people shouldn't have a vote?
I'm not saying they shouldn't have a vote. I'm just saying they're going to die soon, and they need to be thinking about their kids and grandkids rather than just what's happening today. And they're just thinking about Trump versus. Well, Trump versus whoever it is only going to last for another like decade, maybe decade. I mean, if he loses this election, I don't know if he's going to just keep running until he wins. But these people, like the issues that Vivek is talking about, are the ones that we're actually going to impact voters for like the next several decades.
Yeah, which is why I do think that this is not the last time we're going to see Vivek Ramaswamy. I think, yeah, he's going to have his shot for a while. Just real quick though, to like recap with the primary process, I think the problem that Vivek had was that he had all the ideas and was way too arrogant and off with so many people and did not have the funding to back him up.
Oh, really?
And he's trying to run kind of in this lane along with Trump. The problem with figures like Asa Hutchinson or Doug Burgum, nobody knows who they are. They never really had a profile. The problem with Chris Christie was that he also had no
Democrat.
Following. Yeah. He had no influence in the party anymore. And kind of same thing with Mike Pence. The problem with Ron DeSantis is that, you know, I was covering him as a potential candidate as some of my very first assignments with World as an intern in 2021. You know, people have been looking at him for so long, and I think wild possibility. If anything happens to Trump this year, DeSantis will come back. His problem is that he is really bad at the physical act of campaigning. He's a very awkward person.
He's so weird.
He was probably an introvert. I also think his campaign staff kind of did him dirty because once he suspended his campaign, went back to Florida, he is the most engaging person you've ever seen. He's got his charisma back. He's posting like really engaging videos. It's like he's been unleashed. And I thought, who shackled you? Why didn't I see this in Iowa? So
could have been the donors. I don't know if it was like his donors or something.
He suspended them because he ran out of money. And he ran out of money because nobody was confident that he could get anywhere. Also because he's running as another version of Trump. He's trying to get the same group of people to vote for him as a less chaotic version of Trump. But why would they go for that when Trump is right there saying, hi, I'm back?
Right.
Then the problem with Nikki Haley was that she was running on a separate lane. So everyone else is in this lane with Trump trying to compete against him, which you just can't do. She picked a different lane, but it was far too narrow. It did not have just enough of the Republicans who are going to come out to primaries to support her. So she didn't have a path forward. It's possible that her campaign, the group of voters that she did very much motivate, might end up being a spoiler for Biden, which also concerned a lot of conservatives saying, oh, well, why do you have any Democrats supporting you if you're going to be a true conservative? Which is a fair assessment to make, but also she wanted to be the moderate, wanted to be the person of we're going to grow the party. And there just aren't enough people who genuinely want that. But then with the whole primary system as well, you only get like 4 or 5 states before you figure out who the party nominee is. And the point is to get down to one person by the time you get to the convention, but that leaves out so many states. You know, Florida never got a chance to vote for DeSantis.
Right.
So the way it works is a very small segment of the most motivated people in one party gets to decide who your nominee for president will be before the vast majority of the country has voted, which was set up to be, you know, the most democratic system, because it used to be that, you know, the political bosses in New York and different areas, they would determine the candidate. So you started getting primaries around when JFK ran. That was the first time, really, that candidates had to crisscross the country so much for primaries, and it was really new. And they thought this is draining, it's exhausting, but it was to allow the people to have more voice. It's just the people have voices a month apart from each other, and so much happens in that month that you winnow down the field very quickly. And Iowa is very proud of its response. It says it has the responsibility to winnow the field down to the best candidates. But voters in, you know, Minnesota or Michigan will say, well, hey, we wanted the chance to vote. What if we disagree with you? Is this really a service to the party?
Right.
I don't know. But that system does really help Trump when he is the most well-known figure.
Right.
And I don't really have a nice segue into the Bible, but I do want to talk about this God Bless
Yeah.
the USA
Yeah.
Bible.
Yeah.
So Lee Greenwood actually already had come out with it, I think in 2021. I could be wrong on the date, but he came out with it earlier. So it's not a brand new thing.
Right.
But nobody noticed it before because the instant Trump does something, my news feed is covered with it. And
such a weird thing.
So
I
he said,
watched the video.
Weird. Basically, as a recap, he posted this video, said Happy Holy Week. And as part of Holy Week, he is selling a Bible for $59.99.
Right.
And it has, I think it's the King James Version of the Bible. And it includes copies of the Constitution. I think it's the Bill of Rights. There's a few other things. So it's kind of the...
Well, you know that people don't know this about Jesus, is that when he went up to the Mount of Olives with his disciples, he pulled out the Bill of Rights and he started reading them with his disciples. Now, but it is funny because Trump also in that video is like, I have a ton of Bibles. Everybody has a Bible. He kind of talks up how his favorite book is a Bible, and which is different from what he said historically. He said his favorite book historically, what I've heard him say is The Power of Positive Thinking, which is diametrically opposed to the Bible in what it...
Well, he was asked, I think during his... I don't remember exactly when this was, but he was famously asked, hey, what's your favorite Bible verse? And it was 2 Corinthians.
Oh, like the whole book?
That's just what he answered.
2 Corinthians, man. What, like on communion or so? Yeah, it's weird.
I ask a lot of people if they think that Trump is Christian.
Oh.
And there are a lot of people that will say, hey, you know what? We're electing a president, not a pastor. That's the very common line I get from supporters who say, sure, we don't like that he's had several marriages, that he made comments on Access Hollywood, that he still makes just things that Christians is counter to, the Bible. I don't think most Christians go into a store or shop for a Bible based on whether the Constitution is included.
No.
So, but
usually not.
They do believe that he is Christian or spiritual, or they say, everyone has sinned, everyone has fallen short. I'm no different. So, how am I supposed to judge Trump for that? And I think he may be a new Christian, a baby Christian, and he surrounds himself with really good pastors, and he installed those pro-life justices. So he really is like this leader for Christians. And I haven't heard yet what they think about this Bible. Because,
I guess there's nothing wrong with the Bible part of it, like the King James Bible, right. It's just weird equating the document that is God's word spoken with documents created by people who the vast majority of them were at best deists, not like born again evangelical Christians, like maybe John Adams, but like there's the Thomas Jefferson
Bible. But this whole idea that the nation is a Christian nation, and this kind of gets into Christian nationalism debate, which...
Well, let's talk about this, because I bet you I have hardcore opinions on this. Tell me, but what were you about to say?
Well, I have an issue with this phrase Christian nationalism gets batted around as soon as non-Christians see something that they don't like.
Yeah.
So I try to use the term very, very cautiously, because yes, the founders were Christian. Yes, the Mayflower came over with people fleeing religious persecution. But our founding documents, which, let's be fair, were basically rough drafts from 20-year-olds trying to figure out how do we set up a new country. And
geniuses. I mean, genius 20-year-olds. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
I will read Alexander Hamilton or his contemporaries and think, wow, what have I done with my life?
Yeah, we're idiots. Yeah, like
Definitely.
I get that. Yeah,
So I think they
yeah,
set up a very good system. I think that um, I'm not an expert in all the founding fathers, but I assume their faith was genuine. I mean, it was a more religious
yeah,
atmosphere at that time, sometimes more culturally so than, um, I have made a personal commitment to Christ or stuff like that. The thing is, they did specifically set up the country with some religious phrasing, but never that everyone in this country or every law in this country has to be Christian. So this
yeah,
is, I think this is the biggest hardship for Christians who, we're in the already and not yet is what it's called a lot. We yearn for God's
Christendom,
kingdom, and
right?
we have a mandate to advance the kingdom on earth. But God also did not set up earth to be heaven. And, I think it is very much worth promoting policies, promoting laws, promoting societies that advance the kingdom. I don't think it's reasonable to assume that a completely Christian USA is going to happen. Like, I don't want to get too far
Like
into
a full
conspiracy
on.
here where it's like, oh, just don't evangelize. Absolutely evangelize.
Right. Well, evangelism is also an interpersonal relational thing that people like to abstract out to governmental officials. My representative will evangelize for me, and I
Exactly.
understand. But okay, can I make some clarifications though?
Yeah.
Because I think um so this is one of the podcasts I have. My other podcast that's more popular than this one is called, it's a theology podcast. So we do theology. That's one of the primary thing that I like to think about. I like politics, but it gets annoying sometimes. So then I just do theology. And so one of the things that I think is a misunderstanding of the founding fathers is that actually the vast majority of them weren't what we would consider to be Trinitarian Christian, like real biblical Christians. I think John Adams, I think probably was, but there's people have talked about the Thomas Jefferson Bible, where Thomas Jefferson, he was such an enlightenment figure. He was such reason and rationalization and logic focus that he took his Bible and cut out all of the parts in which miracles happened. And then you had the Thomas Jefferson Bible, which is just like 10
I wonder how
pages
much
or
he
something.
sold it for.
Right. Yeah. He was, and then he did a video, and he was like, this is also attached here as the Bill of
Yeah.
Rights. No.
As far as I know, Trump hasn't changed the text of the King
No.
James Version.
Yeah.
So
he's already doing better than Thomas Jefferson in that regard. But I think so. Even during the when they were writing the Declaration of Independence, I think, or in Pennsylvania, I can't remember what it's called. But when they were writing it, basically, and I might be botching this a little bit, I want to say Ben Franklin made a proposal that they would pray before every meeting, and nobody even listened to that. That just got everybody kind of ignored him when he made that proposal. So I do understand that, but I think we have to think about this within our cultural context, in that the way that we try to think about morals and ethics is definitely formed by the the postmodern philosophies that have made its way from academia, which has come from Freudian psychology and Rousseauian romanticism, and these are all terminology that doesn't matter, but all of these different philosophies and psychologies have made its way into the culture. And so we generally like to think that there's a disconnect between what you believe and what you do. And that's because we've been kind of taught that you can believe something, but you shouldn't try to implement it. So Christians shouldn't implement their belief systems into government because of separation of church and state, which wasn't even, I mean, that was in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to a friend of his. It wasn't in anything that mattered. I mean, and the liberals took that and they were see, Jefferson didn't, but Jefferson himself, in the Declaration and in different founding documents, being endowed by our Creator. There's this heavy sense of the rights given to us by our Creator, that God exists, and even if it's just, some of them were deists and they just believed in a God, that God exists, and their presupposition was they're coming from England. You have the Anglican Church, the Christian God, and a lot of the fundamental principles that they enacted were under the Christian ethical ethos. And so I do have an issue with the, like, I totally agree. We have to evangelize on an individual level. That's like fundamental Christianity 101. But if I believe in if I have a principal belief in something ethically, and I think that a functioning society is going to work under laws that are most in tune with human in nature, and most in tune with an proper understanding of human nature, then the most loving, caring thing that I can do as a human being, as a Christian, is try to implement laws that are going to best bring about the flourishing of individuals, and that flourishing. So for instance, like with abortion, it's like I have to be an advocate against abortion, because there's the fundamental principle of murdering is thou shalt not murder. And so but people will say that that's like Christian nationalism, but
Right. And that's what I have the issue with.
right, I don't know,
It's
I guess if they want to
I
call
think
everything some sort of nationalism, they can, but it's just me.
I think it
Yeah.
becomes Christian nationalism if, say, you're a state lawmaker and
Hmm.
you're trying to pass a bill that protects unborn life,
Hmm.
but it is on the basis of Christianity, or it's saying, because God says this is why we
What
have
can
to.
you base it off? Like,
Well,
if
here's the
because
thing.
the bio, yeah, go ahead.
I do think it's worth basing, our worldview is based off of the Bible. And
Right.
that is, you can't get away from that if you're a
Hmm.
Christian. You shouldn't try to get away from that.
Right.
When it comes to politics, the problem is when your identity becomes politics and
Mm,
you're trying to make Christianity serve that, which
mm,
is, I think, when you kind of get into the Christian nationalism sphere,
yeah.
where you want to rework everything
Mm,
as not just according to Christian principles, but is
mm,
explicitly all Christian. And
huh,
if we believe that everyone is made in the image of God,
mhm,
then even people we disagree with deserve that dignity. Even people who
mm,
do not believe in the existence of God deserve that dignity. And you're not going to work effectively on earth if you are only working with Christians, or if you are,
mm,
there's this element of, we hear all the time, oh, don't force a religion down my throat.
mhm,
I think that's fair. We don't want, you know, um, any other religion. We don't want,
mhm.
Thomas Jefferson's version of
Yeah,
enlightenment
right,
to be
right.
forced down our throats where, oh, you can't pass pro-life laws because we're too
Mm,
enlightened for that.
mm,
But there's space to be working with other religions. It doesn't affirm that those religions are right, but it's working in the place that God has given us. And it's this work that we are called to do to advance the kingdom and to use these Christian principles to do so, but
mhm,
not be trying to take on Christ's role as a savior.
mm,
And,
mm. Do,
you
do,
know, it,
I yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, it's a very complicated issue. And I think
Yeah,
I'm still very much grappling with
yeah,
what is Christian nationalism. I think the vast
mhm.
majority of things that get called Christian nationalism are not.
Right. It's just people trying to say what they
It's,
think is true,
it's a whiff
and
of Christianity
mhm,
and a convenient phrase that gets
mhm,
slapped on to say that, oh, you're insert word here, phobic, and
mhm, right.
all these things.
So,
And I
but
don't think that's the case, but I do think that a Bible
right.
like this that Trump is trying to sell, I also don't think it's necessarily Christian nationalism, but I think it walks close to it.
Mm,
Because, I don't like that people are going to stare at this and say, oh, see, Trump wants to root out everybody who's not Christian.
mm.
I think Trump is trying to make some money. I think
Yeah,
it's
for
it's
sure.
a it's an ad,
Mhm,
So it's not some serious, the downfall of the nation is impending right here, but it should also be concerning that you're trying to insert a political identity into the scriptures.
Sure. Sure, and okay, but do you think? See, on on the other side of that, you would say also though that like the secularists and their maybe more arbitrary philosophies surrounding human life, because you can't make complete scientific arguments. So
Mhm.
I guess we've been using the example of abortion for this podcast. So like
Yeah.
it's like the scientific, or we could even do transgenderism. Like that's an area in which for a long time the left was trying to argue for abortion because they told people that you can't exactly define where life starts biologically. Is it the heartbeat? Is it what is it? So is it conception? What is it? And so the Christian argument was, God knit you together in your mother's before your mother's womb, or whatever. That's like you are your being or your soul um exists at the point of conception at the very least. I mean, God had designed this and put it into play far before that. So the idea of you existed even before you were embodied and became a human being. And so the secularists they try to make a scientific argument. Well, we can't tell.
Mhm.
And then when it came to transgenderism, they flipped on that and they were like, well, you can't just gender isn't just biology. Gender and sex are different things, which is the most like ridiculously backwards way of thinking about things. But gender and sex are different. You can't just look at biology and tell me that a man is a man and a woman is a woman, because how somebody feels inside trumps what they are in the human, in the body, in the biology. And so the issue that I run into with, like, if my entire understanding of human nature, human anthropology, and human like relational interactions uh, is based off of my understanding of scripture, because I think scripture teaches all of those things, then my arguments are going to be on the basis of what God says is true and isn't true, because that's the basis of what I think is fundamental reality. And if you get onto the other side of that with the secularists, they're constantly changing. I mean, like at one minute you have to abide by what biology says until biology doesn't fit the creed, which is the creed is like a Romans 1, where it's just like do whatever, where Paul talks about like the
Mhm.
how bad human beings get when they reject Christ, and they start to invent new evils towards the end of that they get to this point in which they're starting to just kind of, well, that doesn't align with what I want to do in the flesh, essentially. And so if it doesn't align with what I want to do in the flesh, then I have to reject it. And so they reject the Christian notion, and they claim that it's Christian nationalism, and that this authoritarianistic Christian implementation that's going to force everybody to be a Christian. But I don't think that that's what the majority of Christian nationalists. There are some people that want that, and it's stupid. You're like, you can't force people into Christianity.
Mhm.
Read your Bible, but you can, and I think you have to set up a governmental structure if we're talking about laws, like laws that we must live by and how we relate to each other. There are assumptions that those laws are built on, that are assumptions about human anthropology, human nature, relationships. And as Christians, the only way in which I can think through those types of conversations is using a biblical worldview and a biblical lens. And so if somebody passed a bill, outlawing abortion, if we just said abortion is illegal across the country, and the reasoning for that was because we are all created in the image of God, like, and we're all created in the image of God, and birth, or a human being's life starts at conception, blah 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 blah, on the basis of what Scripture says. I have a hard time saying that that's not a good enough answer, because the contrary answer is something that's completely arbitrary. It's like somebody just makes up what they think about when human life starts, and then that gets implemented because, what do I want to take on the religion that's been here for 2,000 years with like 8,000 year roots, or do I want to take on like what some 25-year-old or 35-year-old millennial thinks about when a person should we should think that a human being is a human being? Like, they could say that the Christian stance is arbitrary because they would say, well, God doesn't exist. But I'd be like, look, I'll take something that seems arbitrary to you that's been tried and true through 8,000 years than whatever some random person thinks. Now,
Mhm.
I that's a lot. I get that. But I guess that's
Yeah.
kind of the thought process.
Well, I don't think it's a flip side of the coin is the thing. I think that,
Mhm.
per your example, we have 50 different state constitutions
Yeah, right.
that do affirm basic human rights.
Hmm.
It doesn't specifically say that those rights are there at the state level. It doesn't always say that those rights are there because God created every person.
Yeah,
But
okay. Yeah.
it still aligns with a biblical value, even if
Hmm.
it doesn't cite God as the source.
Hmm.
And I think that is a really good foundation to work off of. I think with the abortion example, I I was homeschooled all the way through. I took
Okay.
biblical worldview classes where
Nice.
I was taught that the best way to debate with someone on the abortion issue is all you have to do is convince them that it is a life. The thing is, the Bible and science are not at odds with each other. The
Yeah,
science is there now that babies are babies, that they feel pain, that
right.
hearts and brains develop
Hmm.
shockingly early, that that all the qualifications for life are there.
Hmm.
So we have the science now that does back up that, you know, unborn life is still life.
Hmm.
The thing is, the debate has moved on. So I was outside on the sidewalk in front of the Supreme Court when the leak of the Dobbs draft happened, and then when the Dobbs decision dropped. And
Yeah.
it was one of the biggest crowds I have ever been in.
Hmm.
And nobody was really debating whether it was a life anymore,
Oh, yeah. That's a
which
good point. Hmm.
really shocked these pro life groups that showed
Hmm.
up armed with what we've been taught for so many
Hmm.
years of like, okay, but here's when you can hear a
Yeah.
heartbeat, here's when you can identify pain and all these things. And all these protesters say, we don't care.
Yeah.
They will readily admit that it is a baby. And so pro lifers are caught off guard. Like, wait,
Right. Because they're just like, I
that
want
was
to
all we
murder
had in their
people.
toolbox.
Right.
So it is a very concerning progression on the liberal
Hmm.
side of now the main debate is not whether it's a baby, it's that it's not fair to bring lives into the world if their lives are going to be hard.
Hmm.
There are all these signs I will see, or people will debate, like, do you know how many kids are in foster care right now or waiting for adoption? You know, do you know how hard life is now? What if we can't support all these babies that you're trying to
Hmm.
force us to have? And there was
Right.
someone carrying a sign in front of the court literally earlier this week that
Yeah.
said that adoptees have a higher rate of suicide than kids who aren't adopted.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like, so your implication is that we'd better kill the child
Yeah.
instead of risking them having a
Right.
hard life or
Right.
getting adopted.
Yeah.
And it's a really perverse argument.
Hmm.
And so it's moved on, but the core is that the science of life at conception is there and the
Hmm.
Bible supports it. But if you go to someone and say, I believe life is life because God said, and someone doesn't have the Bible as their basis for truth, it's not going to
Hmm.
convince anybody.
Right. But what's the basis for the state? Because we could say that the basis is, and you're saying it's like the biblical principles without the God,
Hmm.
not yeah, kind of without like the Bible
Yeah, I
verses
do
to
think the Bible
attach to them.
should be a basis.
But if
I just,
somebody says to those states like, okay, those are the laws, why? And then the next answer would be, well, because those laws are based off of scripture, right? And then you would say, so the ultimate basis for what those laws are, the ultimate all the way at their end is the Bible. And I agree with you that maybe the convincing answer to an abortionist who just wants to murder babies isn't going like that person has depraved their mind all so far at that point into the point which they think that even though it's a human being, they're making a judgment call on the dignity of that human being and saying that that human being has absolutely no dignity because they're coming into a world which is a world in which they will have a hard life. That is, and therefore they have the right to they make a judgment call. I have the right to murder that baby And then they kind of make they twist it and say that it's compassion, though, because it's a compassion thing to not bring people into hard situations, which is a redefining of what the word compassion means, anyways. But
Oh yeah.
the but the fundamental I do think that the Christian should be like, look, the no, the reason that abortion is wrong is because human beings have dignity and value regardless of their situation and circumstances in time and space. And so that understanding of human dignity is given to me through scripture. I can understand that because God created human beings in this particular type of way. Christ came incarnate as a human being, embodied, and took on an incredibly suffering life. I mean, he was born in a manger. He suffered. In Hebrews, it says that he took on the trials and temptations, and never sinned in that. And yet his life. I talked to a scholar on Hebrews. The word perfect in the book of Hebrews is bringing something to its ultimate end. And so when it says Jesus is being perfected, it doesn't mean that he wasn't perfect. It just means he was becoming kind of the archetype of who God wanted him to be on the cross. And
Yeah.
so through suffering, Christ did what he ought to do. He did what he was meant to do. He did something that was good, that the liberal understanding of what a human life is for and what it does and what it's meant to be as a human being on this planet is fundamentally flawed, because they have no concept for pain, suffering. They have no concept for any of these deep human feelings and experiences and truths. And then they're making their argument. I don't like, if we take it all the way to its deepest level, which I know you're saying people aren't having these sorts of conversations at rallies. I get that. But if we're having these conversations related to, if like you and I are related to politics, and the only place that I can end at as a I guess in logic would be to say that even though the laws don't explicitly state this, that they're from the Bible, they do ultimately come from the Bible, because that's where
Mhm.
those presuppositions are. And so for me, a Christian making the argument that law should be on the basis of something even more fundamentally objective and real than like what you or I kind of think in a time, based off of our kind of flesh, I guess, based off our
Yeah.
flesh, is it's a much more concrete thing historically, and I think it's also true. It might just, people will say it sounds ignorant, but I'm like, yeah, it also sounds ignorant to just kill babies because you think that they are going to live in a hard life. So they're going to live a hard life, because I could try to reason with these people all day, and I'm sure you've tried, and you're like, there's no, we don't agree on things fundamentally, and I think that that needs to be stated publicly. That conservatives need to be like, we don't agree what it means to be a human being, and so that's the very basis of politics. What is a human being? How do we interact with each other? If we don't agree
Mm.
on what it means to be a human being, we can't agree on how to interact with each other. And if we
And I think
can't,
that's why we
yeah,
need Christians in the public sphere.
sure,
You
yeah,
know, I just kind of draw the line at implementing policies that do force Christianity rather
mm,
than using the truth
mm-hmm,
to influence policy.
mm,
And that's where I
okay,
think we kind of run afoul
mm,
of our mandate as
mm,
Christians sometimes.
mm,
So, you know, let's use our state lawmaker example. And he's putting up a bill and says, hey, here's let's use the family for example.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Here's my bill that will strengthen a nuclear family structure,
yeah, yeah,
or that will do something in the state to
mm,
help um, kids who come from single parent families or no
mm-hmm.
fatherlessness is a huge issue right now.
Yeah, right, right, right.
You don't have to be Christian to agree with literal data that's out there that shows that the breakdown in the family causes a lot of societal issues.
Mm-hmm,
You can debate the faith reasons for that.
mm-hmm,
From a Christian perspective, we believe that God has set up a marriage structure that is for the benefit of humankind, that God has set up a family structure that is for the benefit of humankind, and the entire structure is meant to glorify Him.
mm-hmm,
But you don't have to be a Christian to see that it has benefits.
Mhm.
So a lawmaker can be completely open about his or her faith and say, here's what here's the foundation of what I believe. Here's my bill that helps address a societal issue that maybe doesn't rest on you being Christian to support it.
Mhm.
So in conversations with other lawmakers trying to win votes, they can absolutely be
Mhm.
honest about the foundation and the truth. And that's a form of evangelism too, in my
Mhm.
opinion.
Mhm. Mhm.
But you don't have to, if you set it up that, well, my colleague who is an atheist or my colleague who is Muslim
Mhm.
has to affirm my faith to
Mhm.
vote for this, that's where politics and Christianity become intertwined in a way that they shouldn't be.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, they right, and I suppose this, and that's a difficult one because it's like on the, I guess by affirming you're saying like, what do you mean by like affirming? Just like it being okay with, be,
Like
yeah, what do you mean by that?
a Muslim
Mhm.
lawmaker
Mhm.
can look at the exact same science and data and agree,
Mhm.
yes, we need to do things to help families.
Right.
Their belief structure might be based on a different family structure.
Yeah. Right.
They obviously don't believe in the triune God,
Mhm.
but they don't have to pass a law that benefits a structure that God has set up.
Right, right. I guess the thing that I've seen is that like usually people who don't have a proper understanding of the nuclear family in relation to the Christian religion, their answers to those questions are like, let's just give more money to single
Right.
moms, or so
And that's the
their
problem with
answers are like
politics.
materialistic rather than uh, incentivizing marriage, maybe, or whatever we want to say, or making divorce, putting more laws around divorce and saying like, here's some specific ways in which you can get divorced, and then if it's just like you just like quote unquote fell out of love, it's like, well,
Mm-hmm.
you just can't you can't ruin your kids' lives for that, so like the answers to the questions, I think, oftentimes are going to involve what somebody believes religiously about the actual institution of marriage, or the family. And I think because of that, I do understand what you're saying, but I think functionally what ends up happening is that everybody just continues to have these distinctions on how you need to like make change, which is part of being in a country with 350 million people. But those distinctions are becoming so far apart because the West was built on Christianity, and so if you try to get rid of the Christian presupposition, the entire structure falls apart. And so if the argument from lawmakers in politics can't be that the the structure must be built on something more concrete and foundational than arbitrary human morals and ethics, if that can't be the argument, then I don't know what's going to happen societally. I think we're watching what's happening, and it's like getting really
Right.
bad.
Well, it is a fundamentally broken system
Hmm.
because we're in a fundamentally broken world.
Right, right,
So I think
right.
the struggle we're even having in this conversation is that
Hmm.
there isn't a great way out of this
Right. It's
aside
sin.
from
Yeah. Right.
Christ coming again. And we're
Right.
all waiting
Right.
on that.
Hmm.
And, we've been giving a lot of examples of kind of Christian lawmakers on
Mm.
the offensive, but I think there's a lot of value to having Christian lawmakers on the defensive too.
Mm. Hmm.
And all you have to do is keep up a resistance and voting against, maybe
Hmm.
not similar policies on the flip side that will say,
Hmm.
hey, let's break down the nuclear family
Yeah.
because it's based on something that's very non-biblical. And there is absolutely space for Christian lawmakers to back up their claims with real science, real data.
Yeah.
You know,
Totally. Yeah.
we don't have to, the Bible isn't removed from the world. It
From
does inform
reality.
the
Yeah.
world
Right.
because it's a source of truth. You see a lot of
Mhm.
ways that what it says
Right.
checks
Right.
out.
Yeah.
So there's also a lot of value to holding that line
Mm.
across state legislatures, on school boards,
Mhm.
in
Mhm.
Congress, all those places.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that we would also probably agree that because of that, the government's job should generally be to then enhance the institutions put forth, like the family, like helping the marriage, the family, even like enhancing the local churches and organizations like that in individual
Hmm.
communities to like not have to just like spend all their money on taxes, but to be able to like because
Yeah.
the reason why we have hospitals and orphanages and all these things that are so great that now have been kind of taken over by the government. Those were all started by Christians, and those were all
Well, it
started
was
because of
originally the
Christians.
church's role, to be
Right,
completely honest.
right,
The
right.
reason
Yeah.
we have a foster care system
Mm-hmm.
is because the government had to step in.
Mm-hmm. Hmm.
And there are a lot of institutions that the government runs, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, but a lot of the welfare of the state or the welfare of the city is also a
Hmm.
church's mandate.
Yeah. Right. Right. A hundred
That probably
percent.
gets more into your theology podcast side of things.
Yeah. No,
But
that makes sense. Okay. I know we're running out of time. Do you have how much time do you have?
honestly, it's a Friday, as much time as you need.
All right, cool.
But
I want to talk about RFK because we haven't talked about him at all, and so
yes.
something just happened. He decided to pick a vice president. This to me was a stupid choice that he made. Tell us what happened. Who did he pick, and what was the logic behind this?
Right. So this is a very pertinent topic. I am actually
Mhm.
working on reporting on this at the moment, so listen to The World and Everything in It next
Okay.
week. Shameless
All right.
plug. Um,
Yeah. Yeah. That's fine. Yeah.
because I have many questions and I'm working
Hmm.
on answering them.
Hmm.
What I have seen so far is so RFK Jr. Announced in Oakland, California earlier this week. Well, I should give the exact date. I don't know when you're actually airing this, but
I probably next week sometime. I'm
yeah.
pretty quick, but yeah, just
Well,
when.
either
Yeah.
way, he was in Oakland, California. He announces that his vice president pick is going to be Nicole Shanahan.
Yeah. Right.
She's not a politician, so has very, very little name recognition. Normally, you
Hmm.
want somebody who's going to be a pretty well known political figure.
Like
Um,
Tulsi Gabbard. Like,
right.
that's what I thought. Yeah, come on. What was he
So
thinking?
she is a Silicon Valley attorney, patent lawyer, very, very, very rich.
Mm,
She funded his Super Bowl commercial that was kind
pretty
of
good.
styled on and
Yeah,
used footage from his father and uncle,
yeah.
Bobby Kennedy and JFK. Um, he's trying to kind of continue that legacy.
Mm.
The interesting slash sad thing is that the entire Kennedy family has basically excommunicated him at
Yeah,
this
they don't
point.
like him. Yeah, yeah.
But so Nicole Shanahan, anyway, funded that commercial. And if you know anything
Mm,
about Super Bowl commercials, you've got to be so loaded to get
mm,
one in.
mhm.
Um, so it's probably a good funding choice.
Pick.
She, up until the announcement, was a Democrat
Mm.
and
And now
has
she's not.
donated to Democratic causes a lot of times. The nice thing from a reporter perspective is that the instant somebody makes a political donation, it is archived for all time
Yeah,
and you can see
yeah.
everything.
She gave to Biden, right? Like 30
Yeah,
grand or
she
something,
gave to
which isn't a
Biden.
bunch, but
She's given to, I think, the DNC.
yeah,
So she's donated to Democrats in the past.
yeah.
At the VP announcement, she said that she wasn't too sure about RFK Jr., but once she started hearing him speak, her mind was changed. She was so excited. Um, Mostly on the environmental issues and some medical or kind of. I'm trying to figure out like the best way to describe
Mhm.
these things, but they want like fewer chemicals in foods. And
Yeah.
um, she's not anti-vaccine in the way
Mhm,
that RFK Jr. very much is. And that's
mhm.
another word I don't toss around very lightly. He's not just vaccine skeptic. He's very
Yeah,
anti-vaccine. She's
yeah.
not quite to that level, but she has said she has a lot of concerns about vaccine
Yeah.
injuries. So they align on that front. She's sponsored a lot of research into IVF and
Mm,
women's longevity and has called it, the worst lie that women have been told. And so there's a lot of things in like
hmm,
the medical field when it comes to drugs and what you're putting in your body and things
mm.
like that where they want to like flush out
Yeah.
is maybe the term to use. So they align on a lot of those. And at this VP announcement, She said she's leaving the Democratic Party. She's become disillusioned with them, but she's bringing with her the best ideals and
That's
values.
yeah.
So
Yeah. Like which ones? Like I want to know which one of these are the best.
right.
Yeah.
The thing is, RFK Jr. is barely getting any liberal support, any Democratic
Yeah.
support.
Okay. I was
He's
wondering about
pulling a
that.
lot from conspiracy theorists and not quite MAGA, but maybe MAGA adjacent, because MAGA is very,
Yeah.
very loyal to Trump.
Yeah.
So he's pulling from the very small segment of people who do not want to be moderates, but are kind of feeling independent in that they're comfortable not supporting Trump,
Right.
but they're not anti-Trump either.
Doesn't he polling pretty well among young voters, higher than Trump and Biden?
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
But like we said, young voters don't always actually vote,
They don't always actually vote.
which is the struggle for
And
him.
right, and they're
I
highly
mean,
emotional, so they
he
could
has many
switch at any
struggles.
moment. Yeah.
But I think Nicole Shanahan was the pick probably for her money and in an attempt to start pivoting more to start bringing in more on the left.
Okay.
I don't know if it's really going to work because the left does not allow you to disagree with IVF.
Right.
So again, everyone has their lines in the sand.
Yeah.
But it kind of
Also with
doesn't
vaccines,
matter.
they don't allow you to disagree with vaccines. That's a big
Exactly.
thing. Yeah.
You know,
Right.
all of this kind of doesn't matter though, because
Mm.
especially on journalist Twitter, there's been this sentiment of we're all kind of paying attention to the RFK Jr. race as the only interesting thing in this election cycle.
Yeah.
But he doesn't have a chance of winning.
You don't think so?
At the very least, because he's not on any ballots.
Yeah.
People can't physically vote for him yet. Because he's running as an independent, and every single state has different rules for what you have to do to get on the ballot as an independent. So he's only in Utah so far.
Wait, so he did start his own party, the We the People
Yeah,
party. So what's wasn't there some sort of strategy in which if you start your own party, it's easier to get on the ballot in multiple states? Like that takes less. I don't know all the details. I really
possibly, but
just
that's the thing I'm confused
right.
about too, because he did start this party, We the People, but he's not running on, to put on the ballot We the People candidate Robert F. Kennedy
Oh,
Jr.
really?
He's still running as an independent.
Oh, really?
So I don't really know what the party is there for.
Somebody
Because he's
compared
still
it
trying to
to
get ballot access as an independent in each state. The problem is that he says that he has enough signatures now to be on the ballot in a lot of the swing states. So Michigan, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, I think there are a few others.
Yeah.
But that's his campaign saying that. We haven't actually seen it yet. You have to send it to the secretaries of state. Nevada was one, but he's threatening to sue the Nevada Secretary of State because someone in their office made a mistake and in an email with the campaign said that you don't need to list your running mate in your signature collection process when it turns out you do.
Yeah.
So they technically do have the signatures that they need, but it was before he announced Nicole Shanahan as his running mate, and that's against the law in Nevada. So he's threatening to sue, saying, I should be allowed on the ballot. I've done what you told me to do. But the Secretary of State is saying, well, just because a clerk messed up doesn't mean that the law has changed.
Right.
So as of now, only people in Utah will actually have the chance to vote for him unless there's a lot of write-ins.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I'm interested to see how that shapes up because I don't really see much difference. So like on some of the big issues, which I think like for Christians, obviously the ones that we've talked about, abortion and trans stuff, I feel like he's pretty much the same. Like he wants the 13-week ban on abortions, I think is what he said. Trans stuff, I think he's been pretty outspoken against a lot of that in the same way that a lot of the Republicans have. And then he also has a much better understanding of the medical institutions and what they're doing. Up until he announced this VP, I was like going to vote for him because I don't know. I felt like he was probably. I don't think he's a middle ground. I think he has very hard stances on things. But I felt like if people, a lot of Christians vote on the basis. I know people say that they're like 2-issue voters, like or 1-issue voter, like abortion and stuff like that. Well, on that basis, it's like okay, the Republicans and him are all in the same boat, or they're on the same boat, so it kind of doesn't matter. This was a weird thing because I felt like he had the opportunity to pull in maybe even somebody like Tulsi Gabbard who might have some actual pull amongst type of Democrat. And now this lady, I don't. This is just weird. I don't know what I don't know. Do you actually? So you don't see him having a road to victory here, especially because of this?
Um, well, I don't think he had a road to victory to begin with.
You don't. Okay.
So I
Wow.
don't think that
Okay.
this necessarily changes anything. Um, there's a big push this year to have any other option.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing Republicans and Democrats wholeheartedly really can agree on is that they didn't want another Trump Biden rematch.
Mm-hmm.
They
Well,
might support both candidates. There might be fervent support for both candidates. There's a lot more lukewarm support for both candidates.
mm-hmm.
And it's more of a Trump also gets a lot of votes because people will say anyone other than Biden.
Mm-hmm.
Biden will get a lot of votes not because people are confident in him as a president, but because they really don't want Trump.
Mm-hmm.
So, in many ways, this year would be a perfect year to get
Mm-hmm.
a third party candidate, whether that's
Yeah.
RFK Jr. or I've been reporting on No Labels,
Mm,
who actually the Joe Lieberman, who passed away this week,
mm,
helped or kind of was spearheading for a while of, we're not, they're not officially a political party yet, but they are looking for a candidate. And they said, we're going to
mm,
find a unity party candidate.
mm.
So whatever party the candidate is, they need a vice president in the opposite party. And
You
this is
like
going
the
to be a unity ticket
mm,
that will actually represent most of America
mm,
and that is actually geared towards compromising on issues
mm,
and getting stuff done instead of just partisan gridlock.
mm.
You can argue probably very well that this is a pie in the sky scenario.
They haven't
Um,
found anybody, right? That's what they
no,
haven't.
there's an
Yeah.
exploratory committee that's
Right.
looking for somebody right now. But
Gosh.
also, the longer we're in March,
Yeah.
basically April
That's
now, you are running out of time to
yeah.
get a candidate.
I
But
can
a lot of
imagine the big
people
issue
want
is who's going
somebody
to be the
else.
right. I can imagine for them the big issue is who's going to be the president and who's going to be the vice president. Like
Yeah,
somebody's going to want to be the main person. That's kind
exactly.
of I get that. Like the original plan was back in the 1700s onward for a while. It was like winner is president, loser is vice president.
Mhm.
Um, and I think
They
that
got
that's
rid of that
actually
system for a reason.
yeah. But I also I understood the why that's even better than what this no labels party is trying to do because you're kind of you lost, so you deserve the second place. You don't deserve the first place. Whereas if you try to find two candidates that are going to just agree to get first place and second, like one of them gets to be the president, the other gets to be the vice president, it seems like you're gonna have to have like a really humble person, and that just doesn't
There's
seem like that's
there's
gonna happen.
not a lot of humility in politics. I will
Right,
agree with that.
right, right. Yeah.
But they are, very accurately identifying that people are tired of
Mm,
politics. People
mm-hmm,
are burnt out by partisanship. We have had so many retirements from Congress this year.
mm,
And only a few of them are willing to actually admit that the reason is because there's less and less room for debate.
yeah.
There's um, less room for reasonable discourse. It's just all
Mm,
politics and money and
talking points and yeah.
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 And that trickles down to the voter level too. So RFK Jr. is polling really well, but not well enough to actually win.
Mm,
Only well
mm,
enough to spoil the election, which
mm,
is what we had back
right.
when my brain just blanked, but the other famous third party candidate who never really got anywhere.
What like within the last 10 years or with it like
Yeah, it was the was it with Bush v. Gore? Yeah, I think it was who was the third party candidate?
I don't know. I was one. at the time. I was like zero
Um,
or 1 or something. So I have no idea.
ah,
Yeah.
it's gonna come to me later, but there was a third
Yeah.
party candidate. Oh, Ralph Nader.
Oh, don't be a hater. Vote for Ralph Nader. Of course, one
Yes.
of the
So
best
Ralph Nader
slogans of all
ran
time.
as
Yeah.
a third party candidate, and he pulled enough votes.
Mhm.
That's why we ended up with the closest
Yeah.
election in American history that the courts
Yeah.
had to end up deciding. He never
Wow.
had a pathway to win, but he pulled enough
How
votes. They
effective.
got so close, and he is credited with helping Bush then come out the
Mhm.
winner.
Yeah.
But so it's possible that
Wow.
that's what RFK Jr. does if the people who are actually supporting him in the polls right now do go out and vote for him.
Mm. Mhm. Mhm.
And if
Yeah,
they
that
can vote for him on a ballot that has his name printed on it.
right, right, right. Yeah, it'll be interesting. One of the things that I think people have begun to not trust are the polls though. And that's one of the reasons why I'm like, I totally see, according to the polls, obviously Trump and Biden are going to be the main guys, but I do wonder, they seem to have been off so bad on the right and the left over the past like multiple elections. Uh Midterms were like there's going to be a red wave. That was just not what happened at all. And the polls were terrible. And then obviously 2020, 2016, they've not been very reliable in those ways. But who knows? I do think that a scenario in which RFK pulls, I feel like he'd pull away from Trump voters. That's kind of
Mhm.
what I feel like would generally happen.
So I think
And
that,
then
yeah, I
yeah.
think you're right. The If he stays in all the way through
Mm,
November, if his level of support is about what it is now, which is typically about 20%,
hmm
um, and if
Still
he
pretty
can,
good. Yeah.
yeah, which honestly, way more to his credit, way
Yeah.
more than I thought he
Yeah.
was ever going to get.
Yeah.
Um, but 20, you can't win the
Can't
presidency
win
on
with 20%.
20%.
Right.
So it's if you poll mostly from Trump voters, that means Biden wins.
You think Biden wins, so you think he pulls enough from Trump? I guess 20% is a
I
lot,
think
and you
so,
pull
yeah.
enough from Trump. Man, one thing that I wondered, I think people are so sick and tired of politics in America right now. I was thinking about this the other day. I was like, what happens if just like nobody vote? Like, what happens if like 10 million people vote or like 7 million people vote? You're like, are there any laws? I don't know if you know this, but are there any laws or anything put in place to where it's like this is not a good sample size, and you have nobody voting because nobody cares anymore? Maybe that you just would still just have
I haven't
whoever
seen
wins
any of
that.
that. There
Yeah.
was a special election, I think, last year. Or no, in the primaries this year. It's gonna bug me because I don't remember what state this was in. I
Mm-hmm.
want to say it was Washington State.
Mm-hmm.
But there was some sort of local election that came down to one vote. And
Dang.
the deciding vote were the candidates themselves. One
Oh
candidate
my.
voted for himself. The other
Yeah.
candidate decided not to vote at all because he thought it was unfair.
Wh-
You know, if I'm
why?
running, I shouldn't have a vote.
That
So he
doesn't.
didn't cast a vote and he lost because
What?
his opponent won by one vote.
What? That is the dumbest. It was a Republican, Democrat. Like, which one was the one that said that
I
they shouldn't vote?
I think it was the Republic. I'm really
Whoever it was didn't deserve to win. I'll say that because that is the dumbest logic
well, if it
ever.
was
It's like,
close enough, that means basically whoever they were trying to represent was pretty equally
right,
divided.
yeah, dang,
But I think, see, I cover so much politics that
it's hard to,
my brain will just forget
right.
numbers and names and stuff. So I don't even remember what position this was, but it was at a very, very local level.
Gosh,
Um,
yeah, that is. I
anyway,
would have been
so
like, I'm
you
voting
get a
for
lot of
myself.
close elections like that, but we don't get a lot of just so many people not voting.
Mm-hmm.
The thing
Mm-hmm.
I think, though, I will get so many people asking me, is the country doomed? Or
Mm-hmm.
because that's also a lot of what politicians talk about. Trump will
Yeah.
say that if you don't vote for me in this election, our nation will never recover.
Right. Right.
And, November 5th will be our Vengeance Day. And
Or there's gonna
Biden,
be a bloodbath. He said that
yeah,
one recently. Yeah.
although he was saying that for Ohio when he was like,
Yeah.
there's going to be a bloodbath of
Yeah.
red Republicans winning and all this stuff.
Right. Right.
Um, but then Biden does the same thing in like these
Yeah.
ominous red
Mhm.
backlit speeches where he says every time he talks about Trump, this is the threat to our democracy. And
Yeah. It's so dumb.
he's finally starting to campaign now, which I think is good. But if he mostly campaigns as Trump is a threat to democracy, that's not going to help him in the grassroots where they do want him to talk about the economy and they want him to talk about
Mm.
infrastructure and Ukraine and Israel and all these things. But either way,
I'm interested in that. Oh yeah, go ahead.
well, both of them will use this rhetoric of, I am the one who can save our nation,
Yeah,
or
I
I'm
know.
the one standing to save us all. And
Mhm.
I don't know, the unfortunate side effect of being a politics reporter is that I'm on everybody's press lists, which also means I get all of their email ads.
Yeah.
And Trump's emails are full of, they're only targeting me because they hate you, or it's almost
Yeah.
creepy sometimes. It's like, I love you so much,
Yeah.
and I
It's
need you to
so
chip in
yeah.
$2.
Oh
And
man. This
do
is
you
my
want
spam
tyranny?
in my phone. It's just full of Trump text. It's
Exactly.
insane.
And so, and it's not like he's writing all of these, he doesn't.
No, no.
But
Yeah.
the rhetoric is there that this is the most important election of your lifetime. Democracy is on the ballot.
Mhm.
Democracy is always on the ballot. The
Right.
fact that we have a ballot
Mhm.
is
It's
democracy.
democracy. Right.
And people will say, how can we save the nation? And the thing is, you know, if Trump becomes president again and people are terrified of that, I know people were crying the first time he was elected.
Yeah. Yeah.
The nation survived.
Right.
If Biden wins re-election, I know people who will be crying because
Mhm.
he is president again. The nation will survive. You know,
I guess the issue, and I think a lot of people saying it won't survive. Like I understand what you're saying. Like it's not. People are so catastrophic about this type of stuff. If my
yeah.
person doesn't win,
I mean, look
it's
at even the Bible. You
right.
know, the Bible has survived not because Christians did
Mhm.
anything,
Mhm.
you know, outside of God protecting his word and
Mhm.
God protecting the church
Mhm.
and God bringing all this about throughout
Mhm.
real persecution, throughout natural
Mhm.
disasters, throughout, you know,
Mhm.
copies of scriptures are
Mhm.
lost and then found and all these different
Right.
things. And, you know, Christianity shouldn't be alive today,
Mhm.
given
Yeah.
all that the world has thrown at it. God has preserved it. If
Mhm.
you apply that to politics, and I'm not saying you have to apply everything,
Right.
but, you know, the nation has gone through several legitimate wars
Hmm.
on our own soil, and the nation has survived. It has been painful. It has been catastrophic in some ways. There have been really bad policies that
Mhm.
influenced the entire country for so long and still do. There have been disasters. There have been really, really bad presidents that
Mhm.
we've had,
Mhm.
or really, really good presidents we've had who were assassinated.
Mhm.
So, all I'm trying to say is that the 2024 election does not make or break the world any more than you can say the world will end on such and such a date.
Right. And I think people don't understand. Well, one thing that people don't understand in light of these types of catastrophic viewpoints, people think about politics so catastrophically, is the if America does end, that also doesn't change. Like I think for a lot of people have put their entire identity and life into American politics, and they put that's what they live for. And so if their person doesn't win, they do feel like it is the end of the world. But in reality, like obviously as Christians and as we think about politics, it has to be in light of the fact that it's actually historically very rare that Christianity was in that Christians were allowed to worship freely and do the things that we do in America. I mean, historically, there was a lot of oppression surrounding religion, and the apostles and the first 500 years of 300 years of Christianity was constant persecution, murder, murdering of Christians and things like that. And so you're right. I think that people have such a catastrophic view, and it totally affects. I think it totally affects the people on the political spectrum just kind of becoming more and more and more polarized, because as they feel like things are more catastrophic, they feel like they need to double down, triple down on their person and on their thing. And ultimately, the irony in it is that the demise of the country could come from people's fear of the demise of the country, and that they are afraid that things are going in such a terrible way that they divide themselves so much that then they create a conflict between the two that could ultimately create the demise of the country. So it's this weird irony. And like things are going to play out how they're going to play out. I don't even know. I'm like 2020 was insane, and that was an election year. It's like COVID, the BLM riots, and we're in another election year. Like, what's this summer going to look like? What's going to happen? I'm interested in see how things go down. But right, I think you're right. People like to make this out to be, if America goes, then that's it. It's like, well, that's obviously a
Well, it's that both sides
ridiculous.
know that you can prey on fear. And a lot of
Yeah,
politics is
right,
very fear-based.
right.
Pro-abortion rallies
Mm,
at their core have been the exact same as
mm,
very conservative rallies I've been at. The issues
mm,
are different, but the crux of it is we are terrified that they will take away
mm.
our way of life.
Yeah.
Both sides say the exact same thing,
Mm.
and politicians know how to exploit that.
Yeah, right. 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 So, okay, so let's end with a little bit about Tucker Carlson and his interview with Putin, because foreign policy or the geopolitical stuff to me is a little bit more confusing. I think that's the case for a lot of people. I could talk a lot more about what's happening in America, but when we look at what's happening in the rest of the world and America's relationship to these things. So, okay, so for people who have been living under a rock, Tucker did an interview with Putin in Russia, probably a month and a half ago, maybe a month ago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was interesting. I thought it was a fine interview. I think I think he did a good job. I felt like I'm more interested in talking about what the response was to this interview, and how people on both sides of the aisle um, responded to it. I guess my first question for you is kind of what is your so you listened to it, right? You
I did, yeah.
Okay. So what were your initial thoughts on this?
I would not call it an interview.
Okay. All right.
I I have a lot of issues with it. Mostly in that it's not journalism. And I think it's a
What
big
Tucker's doing.
insult to call it journalism
Okay.
because Tucker Carlson set this up, even in a promo, as he was the only one brave enough to go and interview a dictator, and it's important to listen to all sides. And that's A, wrong,
Mm,
and, well, look, A, factually incorrect,
mm,
and B, just a slap in the face of journalism.
mm,
Because even the Kremlin had to fact check him and say, no, we get requests for interview all the time.
mm.
We've It's just that we've only accepted his. If the Kremlin has to fact check you, you know something's really wrong.
Why?
And
Why? Why do they only accept him?
that's the big question.
Yeah.
Because the Kremlin will only um, they will only accept American media attention on their terms. We
Mm-hmm.
have no idea what Tucker agreed to,
No.
but he had to agree to something.
You think
We,
so?
you know,
Do you
and
think he's lying though? Like I've listened to his other interviews. Like he did one with afterwards with like Lex Friedman and yeah, maybe he makes it sound like he didn't have to agree. Like he makes it seem like that.
he's great at sounding like that, but
Mm,
also, what are you going to do? Oppose a world dictator
yeah.
with the KGB guarding the exits? Like,
Mm, mm,
Russia is a master at propaganda and misinformation.
mm,
And if the point was we need to hear
mm,
what all sides have to say, even if they are authoritarians and dictators, I'm not debating that. Of course, we want to
mm,
hear what all sides have to say.
mm,
I'm going to report on both pro-lifers and pro-abortions, even
mm,
though World as an institution is Christian and takes a stance on life. All voices should be heard.
mm,
But this wasn't any sort of hard-hitting journalism. He asked no difficult questions.
mm.
I guarantee you every question had to be vetted first, and only what the Kremlin wanted him to ask.
Hmm.
He didn't push back on any of Putin's claims, which was a drastic reinterpretation of history around the
Yes.
2014 uprising in
Yeah.
Ukraine. And it's not, he had to agree to something to get this
Mhm.
interview.
Okay.
And
Think about it. Okay, so think about this and tell me if I'm stretching. If I mean, obviously we're speculating about the motives, and I think it's good to speculate about them, especially in a situation like this where we're talking about like a dude who has like huge nuclear weapons and is in a war
mhm,
with the eastern part of Europe and could potentially start a world war. Okay, so um, do you think that Putin knows that there? I mean, I obviously Putin knows that in America there's major distrust in media outlets. I mean, nobody
yeah,
trusts any of the mainstream media, and people are breaking away, creating like independent things or individual things. Tucker Carlson Network is his own individual thing. Do you think he knows that if he were to let somebody in and let them ask whatever questions they want, somebody like Tucker Carlson, who's maybe top 3 or 4 most popular interviewer. I mean, Rogan's number one, and then you have some other people, but
mhm.
Tucker's up there. Do you think that he knows? Okay, if I let this person in, I let them ask whatever they want, and there's the natural intimidation factor that psychologically Tucker Carlson goes into Russia. I'd be nervous, even if even if you try not to be nervous, you'd be like, okay, I'm going to try to ask the best questions I can. I also understand that I'm here, and I also understand that they could take me. They could do.
Yeah,
They could do what they want because I'm in their country. Do you think that he understood this though? That the that Putin was like, ask whatever questions you want, so that he could portray a type of picture to the West that he's the sane one. He's allowing questions from the media. He's allowing questions from people in America. And in America, people like Tucker Carlson are being shut down by the government. They're being shut down by Tract and things like that. I mean, he talked about it on the Lex Fridman podcast, how his phones like drain battery constantly, that he's being tracked by like the
yeah.
FBI and things.
Well,
It could be a political play, and he could be Putin.
I think
Tucker,
Putin knows
yeah,
that Tucker's audience is a lot of people who already don't like the funding for the war in Ukraine.
mm,
And voters can leverage lawmakers.
mm,
And I think endgame, he wants to hamper Ukraine in whatever ways he can
mm,
so that he wins. And he wants US aid absolutely to stop because he never expected this war to go on for more than a week tops. It's been
yeah,
more than
yeah,
2 years now.
mm-hmm,
It is devastating for that continent. It's harming civilians in Russia.
mm-hmm,
Um, the thing about Russia is it's not a free country. They
no,
don't have freedom of the press. They are conscripting
mm-hmm,
men to go die at the front. There
mm-hmm,
isn't really, the government is not working for the people. The government is working for the government.
yeah,
But Americans, especially in Tucker Carlson's audience, are so enamored with the idea of just being a contrarian
mm,
and, fighting the establishment or fighting what they call like the neocons and the war machine, that when Putin presents himself as, oh, let me give you this, you know,
mm,
1,000, 2,000 year history of
yeah, right,
Russia, and really, I'm just fighting to protect our people and fighting to root out neo Nazism, they'll eat that up. And
yeah.
Tucker
That was
Carlson
an
does not push
interesting.
back on any of that. He doesn't push
It,
back on the fact that
yeah,
Zelensky is Jewish.
right.
He's not propping up neo Nazis.
Hmm,
Or, there's this misinformation that Ukraine is cracking down on religious freedoms because they're closing Orthodox churches. What the West doesn't understand is that the Orthodox churches are not churches, they're Russian
hmm.
plants. The
Well,
Russian
okay, so
Orthodox, like
yeah,
the priests and
okay,
the ministers, they are all in the hand of the Kremlin.
yes,
And
yeah,
so it's not like, your Baptist church down the road and they're preventing you from
right,
praying. It's that
hmm,
he's closing buildings
hmm,
that are effectively spies.
hmm.
And so there's a lot of things like that that Tucker Carlson will then promote and not fact check at all. And
Yeah, Yeah.
I mean, my big problem with it, honestly, is that
It seems
Tucker
more
Carlson,
ignorant, though. It seems less like Tucker is making like
well, Tucker
he's
Carlson
pro
has a
Russia rep.
reputation to rebuild, and he's not a journalist. He's a talk
Yeah,
show
he's got
host at
opinions.
best.
He's an
Here's
opinion.
the other thing. If we really wanted a journalistic interview with Putin, which of course I think is valuable to have,
Mhm.
then Evan Gershkovich should be the one doing it.
Who's that?
So
I should know who that is.
so Evan Gershkovich is a Wall Street Journal reporter who has been
Oh,
he's been
yeah.
imprisoned in Russia for actually exactly a year now
Hmm.
because he called the war a war,
Hmm.
which you're not allowed to in Russia. You're supposed to call it a military operation. He was doing things all in the course of his job.
Yeah.
But again, there's no freedom of the press in Russia. So when you have reporters from a country that does have freedom of the press, you get rid of them whenever you can. He's been jailed for over a year now on claims that he was a spy. And it's not true. And people are praising Tucker Carlson for bringing up Evan Gershkovich at the end of the interview saying, would you be willing to release him?
Yeah,
And
right,
they're
right.
praising him as if that's some sort of hard question
Mm.
or,
Right,
oh,
his
it's
answer is
really
going to
good
be
that he
no.
took him to
Right,
task on this. No, you
right,
didn't.
right.
And if America wanted an actual well-done interview with Putin, Evan Gershkovich should be the one to do it.
Hmm.
But
On American
he's been
soil,
jailed
probably.
because he does
Right,
ask questions
right.
that
The
you're
issue,
not allowed
yeah.
to ask in the Kremlin.
No, I get what you're saying, and the major, I feel like the main problem is that it was on Russian soil. If it would have been anywhere else, I feel like, well, and I don't want to give Tucker a pass. I mean, the arguments that you're making make sense. That there is either an ignorance, which would also be unacceptable from somebody like Tucker, because he's going and doing an interview with Putin. He should know what is going on. He should know what's happening in Ukraine, and he should know a little bit of the history, which that is
Okay, but if
characteristic of. Yeah,
this
go
is
ahead.
why I
Sorry.
don't think he's a journalist. If he pushed back on that, or actually researched the history of Ukraine,
Yeah.
or researched Zelensky, or researched all these things that his audience laps up, he cares
Hmm.
about his ratings and he cares about his audience. And if his audience saw that, for all his words about, I'll go where other people won't and I'll get the information that gets silenced, he's catering to his crowd. He can't say things that will tank his ratings, so he won't.
Yeah, I could. Okay, and you think that that's an active, like that he's actively doing that as a interviewer or whatever his profession is, not reporter, but a guy who talks and has
Yeah,
conversations with other people, that
he
he's doing this
wants.
actively rather than that he's just like most I'm doing air quotes, journalists in America who are just ignorant morons who don't do any research on anything. I mean, like that's one of the issues with journalism today and Tucker wasn't exemplified this in the interview with Putin, was exactly what you're saying. Okay, so you can ask a broad general question, and then Putin gives a bunch of like this whole maybe revised history of what happened, but it sounds very specific. And because Tucker doesn't actually know the history, he has no rebuttal for it. And so part of it, I do agree. I think part of it is, well, it's just a lack of preparation to me. But
Mm-hmm.
you're saying that it's a lack of preparation because there had to have been other motives, or there had to have been other conversations that
Yeah,
were had between him and Putin's team,
yeah. I think
and
he exploits pretty well this mistrust of media, which in some ways is very well founded.
yeah, right,
Um,
right.
I'm not saying that mainstream media is some paragon of virtue,
Hmm. Hmm.
and I'm not even saying world isn't even considered mainstream media.
Yeah, right.
Um,
They're getting
but
bigger, right? I mean,
yeah, but Tucker's version of it is honestly propaganda with a mask of journalism over.
mm,
So I
yeah,
consider it honestly journalistic malpractice. And it's
mm,
deceiving people because the point of journalism is to hold power accountable
mm,
and to get all the facts that you need to show the public what is going on.
yeah.
And
It
I
takes
think both
integrity.
Tucker and the mainstream media have lost their way on that because the goal is not to inform people, it's to instruct people.
Yeah,
And
totally.
I have a huge problem with that.
Okay, I can get behind that, and I think that you're right. I do think, yeah, man, and I felt like Tucker, since he's left Fox, has actually gotten better, because at Fox, I felt like he was an absolute, like, it was impossible to listen to him. He would talk like he was talking to 5-year-olds, and you had a bunch of 90-year-old boomers
Well, I
watching
think
him
he's
every
still the
night.
same. He just sounds a little more measured now.
I think, well, I do think that there's less constraints, because Fox is is definitely a propaganda outlet, but and I think you're right about everything, but the response nonetheless from the right, which I
Hmm.
think is interesting, is, and I talked to people that, they're like, I there's this desire on the right, and I don't know if it's everyone, but there's this desire for strong leadership, for very strong leadership. And I think that what they saw in Putin, even if it's corrupt and evil, is strength. And they were like, that feels good. When they watched it, they liked that the response was so clear, and they liked that Putin seemed, just very strong. And I think that that is something that Tucker, maybe he wasn't even trying to tap into this, but nonetheless he did. He tapped into this strength that is missing in the American political system. And there's this desire from people on the right, especially, to replicate that in some capacity. The weird thing for me is why they don't look at Zelensky similarly. I feel like Zelensky also just does exemplify, strength in some capacity. I mean, right? He's like
Hmm.
still in Kiev, right? And he hasn't fled. Is right? Am I right about that?
Yeah, I
Okay,
think, well, on Putin's side, of course you have to exude strength when you murder your opposition.
right.
It's
That's what totalitarian. Yeah, that's what those types of
right.
states are built off of. Yeah.
So it does kind of confuse me when people view that in a really positive light of,
Mm,
oh, he's so smart, and oh, he speaks so well.
right.
The other thing is,
Right.
we don't have any really lack. This interview didn't really tell us anything we didn't already know about Putin,
Yeah,
other
I
than
felt
that
that
he's a
too.
huge history buff. Like,
Right.
he gets to speak all the time
Mm,
unopposed because
mm-hmm,
no opposition is allowed. Alexei Navalny was found dead. Um,
mm-hmm,
and so Zelensky, by comparison, he was a comedian before he became president. And I think that's
yeah.
been used against him a lot. But also, he didn't
Trump
flee
was
his.
yeah.
Yeah,
I don't. Those arguments are so dumb. It's like people can pivot. Good
right.
grief.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah.
Right.
Um, but Zelensky didn't flee his country.
Mm,
None of his cabinet did either.
mm,
And a huge part of Ukraine's resistance hasn't just been help from other countries, it's also been because they have this unexplainable drive and fight that is for survival
mm-hmm,
that technically shouldn't work. This is a,
mm-hmm,
you know, Gideon and the however many he had
mm-hmm,
um,
mm-hmm,
against a massive army, a
mm-hmm,
superpower. And Ukraine is not in NATO. It has a leader who does exemplify strength but is attacked a lot.
mm-hmm,
Ukraine also has not always been a. There have been legitimate complaints that Ukraine has dealt with so much corruption in the past.
mm-hmm.
Um, but again, it's the
What's
propaganda
the
machine that really works
uh,
against Zelensky and works in America because there's this argument that we've got to look to our own borders, or Marjorie
mm,
Taylor Greene will say all the time, why should we be helping Ukraine? Most people can't even find it on a map. It's like, well, maybe we should improve our education system
yeah,
then.
maybe people are idiots, right? Like, it's right
Like,
next to
I
Russia.
can't pronounce a lot of Midwest city names. That doesn't
Right.
mean I'm gonna like.
Yeah. Who cares about, yeah, what's happening in
But it's
Hawaii,
just this
because
kind of
yeah.
isolationist
Mhm,
viewpoint, and they will throw whatever they can at
mm.
Zelensky. But he has been a very strong leader, I think.
Yeah, it seems to negate the issue that if and I don't know where I land on the foreign policy stuff yet, so I'm just talking through it, but if you get rid of American support for things like, the war in Ukraine, it seems like okay, if you get rid of American support and let's say like NATO and a lot of the other European countries also aren't supporting as much, which I would like to see those countries support more than America because geographically they're closer and this affects
I
them
mean,
on
they
on
do
a higher.
support more as a percentage of their GDP. They do.
Yeah, yeah, I get that, but I also get that like proportionally America is supporting. So I get some of the frustration is like if this were such a big problem in Europe, then you would see resources coming from Europe that were that would be proportionate to the problem. And so some people say, okay, well, if the countries in Europe aren't giving like proportionately, then why would America send a disproportionate amount of money from our own from ourselves to Ukraine in this war? There seems to be something off, that there's a perception issue if the countries that are geographically closest to Ukraine aren't proportionally giving as much as the United States is, who's separated by an entire ocean and then some. And so I think that that's one of the issues that
Mhm.
I run into. But contrary, on the other side of that, I think of that the isolationist perspective also doesn't necessarily make sense, because if you don't do anything right now, I do feel like Russia does have the capacity to obliterate. I mean, they have more nuclear weapons than anybody in the world and bigger nuclear weapons than anybody in the world, so far as we know. They do have the capacity to take out Ukraine if they want to, just on that basis. I'm not saying that that's what they're going to do, but if they do take out Ukraine, then that does seem like it would start some sort of world war, and therefore the isolationist, it's just kicking the can down the road. It's like either prevent it now or
Mhm.
have to get involved in something much bigger later. It does seem very uninformed and stupid. A lot of those people, like who'd you say? Who were you just talking
Marjorie
about?
Taylor Greene.
Yeah, that's the type of person that would say something like that. So
Right.
let's
But
just say that.
she does, she's not saying it just as her own idea.
Hmm.
It does represent
A lot
how
of
a
people.
lot of voters feel, especially MAGA voters.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, overall, I think America's contribution is monetarily a lot more, but it's a very small percentage of our defense budget.
Hmm. Yeah,
And,
yeah.
you know, as proportions of the GDP, the UK, Germany, France,
Hmm.
Poland give so much more, and they're accepting refugees.
Hmm.
You, the US is also accepting some refugees, but not nearly at the same
Right.
rate.
Okay.
And I think the other thing is that, you know, Poland doesn't have nuclear weapons.
Mm.
So there is a lot of back and forth of how much is the US responsible for. We're not
Mm.
geographically close, but we are the next, world
Mm.
power that, if Ukraine falls, that does create a huge issue. And some sort of
Yeah,
bury
right.
your head in the sand, like at the start of World War II, it's not going to work in the long run because the world is so interconnected now.
Yeah, that's true.
And Putin will keep on trying to grab more and more
Mm.
land. This isn't some
Right.
historic, it was ours anyway, and we have to fight neo Nazism. It's a power grab.
Right.
So the concern is, you feed him maybe Ukraine now. What
Right.
happens when he gets hungry again?
Right.
And
Right. Or
no
the
other
next
country is
regime
really strong enough to stop him except maybe China, which is
would
not going
probably.
to.
Right. 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 That's no, and I think generally I've gone back and forth on America's relationships to like to these exact issues, um, because they are complicated, right? If you don't do something at the right time, it's very much a thing of timing. If you don't do something at the right time, if America's not involved at the right time as the biggest superpower in the world with the second most nuclear weapons and definitely the best military in the world, if we don't do something at the right time, it could be catastrophic. And so it is much more complicated. And I think that the isolationist perspective oftentimes it sometimes seems to me just very passive, very much like I don't want to get involved in things until they affect me. America first, America first. Well, it's like fine, you can say America first, but part of what America is the ideas that make up the ideals that make up the American um, I guess the American experiment. And so those ideals that started
Mm.
that were part of the Revolutionary War that then created this chain reaction across the world in which many different countries had different revolutions and some worked, some didn't work, and governments were kind of flipped upside down, and there were more democracy all over the world. That was started by the United States. And the question is, okay, then does the United States need to work on maintaining and advancing that sort of thought process? And I think that the Christian perspective should be closer to yes than to no, basically because what you'll run into with somebody like, or a place like China or like Putin and Russia, is that their political philosophy is so contrary to human nature that it requires very, very, very bad things, murder and war, to and corruption and manipulation to maintain. And because that's the case, well, they're, like you're saying, they're just going to keep trying to grab more power. They're going to keep trying to maintain that structure, and it's never going to end. It's they're going to continue to be hungry for more, and the West is already having an internal crisis. I mean, Europe isn't even necessarily Western, neither is the United States
Yeah.
in the sense of the ideals. And
Well,
so you're at this tricky cross point in history right now where the West doesn't know what it is anymore, but it's trying to defend something that seems to be a little bit better than what's happening in some places in the East, maybe. But in the East, they still kind of know like what a man and a woman is, and like they can figure out some basic things. So you're at this just weird place where everybody kind of sucks, and but they all have nuclear weapons, and you're like, okay, so what do you do? And they all kind of don't like each other either, and oh man, it's just weird.
yeah. Well, I think
Yeah.
this is where biblical objectivity in journalism comes into play, which now that I
Yeah.
think about, I really should have opened this entire conversation with this,
Mm-hmm.
which is that the way that World reports on issues is very unique among outlets,
Yeah.
because we do view the Bible as the source of all truth. But what we're
Mm-hmm.
different from compared to other Christian outlets is that we will cover all news, not just as it affects the church or missions or
Mm-hmm.
theology. And there's certainly space for that, but World covers everything. That's why I'm in DC
Yeah.
watching
Right.
politics, interviewing people all the time. And it's not necessarily about Christian issues, it's about everything. Because
Yeah.
Christians aren't meant to just bury their head in the sand.
I know.
But the
Yeah.
way that we view stories is on this level, on what we call kind of the rapid scale. If you've ever been like whitewater rafting, this
Okay.
is kind of
Yeah.
the measure it pulls from, where level 1 is something very basic that
Mm-hmm.
the Bible tells us about, that this is the baseline for truth. God created the world. Jesus is the Son of God. The Bible is inerrant. Human life is created by God, has dignity. These things that the Bible is crystal clear about is what we will take stances on as a publication. So that's why we have a pro-life beat. It's not that we'll ignore the pro-abortion side, but we do believe the Bible is clear about life, or clear about a man is a man and a woman is a woman.
Yeah.
That will get us canceled in some circles.
Right.
But the point is not to silence what is counter to the Bible. We'll still report on all that because it's important to see the entire scope, but we're not going to use the language of mainstream media. So we will never call an abortion center a clinic, because it's not an accurate use of word that denotes healthcare. We will never say a transgender man if you are biologically a woman.
Right.
We'll say something else to show that this woman thinks that she is a man, but we're going to stay true to what the Bible says. As you get up the different levels, let's say a class 2 or 3 rapids issue is something the Bible does speak to. It's not a commandment.
Yeah.
It can inform us. This is where a lot of social reporting comes in. We have a beat called compassion that covers immigration and policing and public programs and things where you see the sin in the world and you're trying to address it and you're trying to make the world a better place. And there's some disagreement on how to do that. But the baseline is humans are created by God and have dignity and should be treated with compassion. And you should approach it with a desire to preserve life, because that's something that we have as a gift from God. Where I cover all the way in like the class 6, 7 rapids issue. The Bible does not say whose budget is better. The Bible does not say which president you should elect, or, how much money we should send to Ukraine. it does inform a lot about human nature. We know from reading the Bible what sin nature is and what we can expect from people with a sin nature. We know from the Bible what to expect when leadership works well. And we know from the Bible to treat all sides with dignity and to honor authority even if you disagree with authority. And there are a lot of ways to do that. And so I love my stories that get both sides mad at me because I consider that's my job. My job is not to tell you how to vote. My job is to tell you what people think about their vote. My job is not to tell you whether to support Ukraine. My job is to tell you how much money is going to Ukraine. What's the debate over tracking this money? My job is to shed a light on, okay, what is really going on with these churches? Because these are really valuable questions to have. So I'm going to give you the facts. I'm not going to tell you what to do about them. And I'm not going to tell you that the Bible says you have to buy the God Bless the USA Bible, or you have to vote for Trump, or you have to vote for Biden, or if you don't do any of this, you're not a Christian. This is informed by the Bible, but not included in the Bible, if that makes sense. So that also informs a lot of how I view a lot of these topics. I'm not an expert in Russian history or geopolitics. All I have to do, though, is find people who are and identify where they disagree and present those fairly.
Yeah. No, that makes sense, and that's clarifying. I think that's and you're in part of that is that you are open to telling people my presuppositions are biblical presuppositions, and when you start with different presuppositions, you end at different places. Level 6 looks different here at World than it does at CNN because your presuppositions are wildly different, and so they're going to end at different places.
Yeah.
That's not bad, and that's actually just a fact of being a person, is that you have understand presuppositions and you have things that you've built your life on and belief systems on, and so that affects how you make decisions, and how you think about the world. I don't exactly know where I stand yet on the complete disconnection between information and activism. I that would maybe be the word to use. I understand that you're saying the goal is, here's the information, now make a wise decision based off of that. Now the information has this undercurrent of Christian value, but it doesn't necessarily tell you exactly what you ought to do.
I mean,
And
the
I'm
point
more,
is
that's
that,
just like my personality is like,
the
let's
point is
just
that
figure it out.
there is objective truth, and we don't
Mhm.
have to compromise that to be reporters.
Right.
But we also don't have to use that
Mhm.
to take on this role of some sort of political leader
Yeah.
or a spiritual leader that tells you what to do. That's not what journalism is for. I'll get so many people who will not give me an interview until they figure out what my angle is.
Yeah, right.
And even in these crowds with people who hold very different views than I do about abortion or transgender issues, I don't tell them what I think. I will never tell a source what my political beliefs are. I will never tell them who I voted for, anything about my opinion on something, because the point is to hear them. And media has gotten into such a place where where even sources feel, I can only talk to people who agree with me.
Yeah.
And so
Right.
you get Fox on one side,
Yeah.
CNN on the other. You have drastically different views of the world because people will not talk to each other. And I don't want myself to be the story. So I'm not going to insert myself into that. I'm not going to debate what I think about anything. Even in most of this conversation, I'll talk about what I see happening, and I'll talk about polling rates, and here's facts that we do see from Ukraine versus Russia and things like that. And I'll be firm on the theology that I believe informs that, but I'm never going to say in any sort of professional context, here's what I think, because then that's leading people to either dismiss me or feel like they have to follow me. And I'm not the point here.
Yeah, I get it. Oh man, I get it. I don't know. I get it, and I think that that's way, way, way better than 99% of media out there. I mean, 99% of media is just like, but I don't even know if
It's a
they're
unique
doing it out of
position to be. We're a bit of an
right,
island.
right. Because most of media, they might say that they're giving the facts.
Well, media favors personalities like Tucker
Yeah,
Carlson or like,
sure.
the NBC News anchors.
Right, right. Yeah,
You
right,
know,
right.
they favor personalities, and you have come to expect that, but I
Hmm.
don't think it's helpful for
Hmm.
journalism, and I don't think it's helpful for information.
Hmm. Yeah, we should. That's interesting. I have to think through all this because I don't know. For years I don't know where I stand on it because I look historically at historic whatever news outlets or magazines or things like that, and a lot of them have had just a very clear, this is what we think and this is what we think you should think, and I think that that's actually good sometimes to say it, because then you run into people like CNN who say that they don't do that, but they're totally doing that. It's not even a question. They won't. They only talk about specific things. They don't talk about other things. So in that sense, they have an agenda in which they're like, yeah, we're not telling you what to think. We're just giving you the information. But it's like, yeah, but you don't actually give all of the information. You give
Right.
10%
They
of the
color it in
information.
a way,
Yeah. To which there's
or
no other
they
way to think. Right.
right. But I don't know. I still disagree that any outlet should, even if you're on the flip side. I hate that newspapers endorse presidential candidates. That's what donors are for. That's what
Yeah.
think tanks are for.
Do you
That is
think that
not
people
what a
can be
newspaper is for.
Do you think that people have the ability to be neutral though? Objectively, truly,
Like
absolutely
completely
neutral.
no,
Okay, so
no.
but then how then you kind of have to be an advocate in some capacity.
I don't think so. Because trying to reach some point where everyone is completely objective and unbiased, that's never going to happen.
Hmm.
And, even at World, we are recognizing that we have a bias towards the truth in the Bible.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to hide that.
Mm-hmm.
We're not trying to root out any independent thought. What we're trying to do is make the truth as a foundation for
Mm-hmm.
objective reporting in addition to that. And I
Mm-hmm.
think if news outlets recognize their own biases,
Mm-hmm.
you can still have a
Mm-hmm.
personal bias and not let it influence you. It takes practice.
Right.
It takes
Right.
a lot of restraint.
Hmm.
And it takes a lot of voices too within an outlet to say, you know, hey, on this segment, we're going to have this guest. Let's have an opposing voice too.
Hmm.
And let's not silence or demean one or the other to tilt our hand.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just show the facts.
Mm-hmm.
And
No, yeah,
readers,
people
audience
don't do
responds so well to that.
that. Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
will get more positive feedback on short explainers that I do,
Mm-hmm.
recapping the State of the Union or a debate or here's what's inside this bill, that sometimes doesn't even include interviews. It's just explaining what's going on. And it's refreshing in a
Mm-hmm.
large way because media can be very draining because people see the bias everywhere, but it's like you're pretending the bias doesn't exist. It
Right.
does, but you have to learn how to work with it and tamp it down in a
Mm-hmm.
way that makes sense so
Mm-hmm.
that you're not compromising, or at least from world side, you're not compromising on the truth, but you're not compromising on objectivity either,
Mm-hmm.
which a lot of other Christian outlets will do, where you don't get the full story because you're only looking at the Christian side. And I don't think that's really helpful either.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I understand what you're saying, and I think, man, I think we could talk about that for another like 5 hours because I
Oh
have all these other
yeah,
things.
I
So,
could go on and on.
yeah, so I do think, well, and I think maybe something to think about. I don't necessarily. I think the maybe the disagreement that you and I would have there is that I don't think that there's a difference between objectivity and the truth. I think that the objectivity is the truth, and that's now I'm not an objectivist like Ayn
See,
Rand
I don't
because
think we
that's
disagree on
utilitarian.
that.
You disagree on that, or
No,
you
no,
do
I
that?
don't think we disagree on
Oh,
that.
okay, okay. Why? Well, okay, because if the truth is fundamentally Christian and the Christian worldview is the truth, then things that are being objectively reported on should be in line with what is true. And so therefore the truth in Scripture it's an advocating truth. It's a truth for repentance. Now I'm not saying that like in news stories you should be like, because Biden's going to be elected, you need to repent or something like that. I don't know. Like, but that things that the reality of the world points towards an objective truth, that the truth points towards Christ, and that Christ has come, and the scriptures are true. How you can draw a direct line to like news and current affairs, I would need to think more about that. But I think generally I agree with what you're saying, that there's some sort of understand, there's some sort of way in which you need to kind of get rid of what you want to tell people to do and just give them, here's the thing that is. So here's the polls. Here's what people
Right.
say, and
Well, maybe
you
to
might,
clarify, like, yeah, I don't believe that biblical truth and objectivity are at odds.
mm-hmm,
I think the whole point is that, yes, every single one of my stories, I want to be pointing to an objective truth.
yeah,
Sometimes the truth is that there's reasonable debate on something,
mm-hmm,
and the Bible doesn't have a commandment on it.
mm,
But the Bible is still informing how I report, how I treat my sources, even
mm,
how, you know, what the goal is for the flourishing of human society and things like
right,
that. So I don't think they're necessarily at odds.
mm,
I think that world has a unique way, but a way that also works to
mm-hmm,
actually match those up.
yeah, right. No, I can see that, and I actually think World is doing a lot of really good work. So I have nothing against World, nothing against what you're doing. I'm just trying to think through the relationship between the investigator, the journalist, and how they put their things out there. It's an interesting conversation, especially in light of what's happened over the past several decades with mainstream media and these legacy media companies becoming like complete propaganda outlets, and not even saying things that are just very basic truths, or twisting things so much to that now the public perception of something that maybe at one time wouldn't be disputed is being disputed, because nobody has an understanding of what's actually going on, because the reporting has become so gross, honestly, like so opinionated. Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I feel okay, so we do need to wrap it up, because
Yeah,
we
I've taken up a lot of your time.
no, it's no problem. This has been very interesting, and I think we should, if you're up for it, closer to election time, do another one, because I want to know what's happening. I mean, you do so much work related to figuring out exactly what's happening on the campaign trail. It's like I would be exhausted if I was going to all of those events, and probably annoyed with people. And so thanks for doing all that. Yeah, I don't know. Thanks for coming on the podcast and doing this. I mean, this is very interesting, and I feel like I
Yeah.
learned a lot, and now I have to think about more things. So that'll be fun. Yeah.
Well, that was my entire goal. But no, thanks
Great.
so much for having me. And
Hmm.
yeah, would definitely love to keep in touch.
Hmm.
Politics is exhausting
Yeah.
and
Right.
nasty and depressing, but it's also very entertaining.
Hmm.
It's fascinating. The whole year is going to be, a slog for me, but it's
Mm.
also very energizing.
Right.
Maybe I'm just a little weird that way, but
No.
please allow me to vent about politics at any time.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thanks so much for doing this, and hopefully we'll see you again.
Yeah.